protagonist arrived at an open area where he saw a giant Odorigi spire. He had heard that it was believed to be the horn of the giant who had created the entire world. According to old legends, it was said to be a foreign tower that had accidentally fallen from the sky. It was also believed that if someone were to ask the priest of the deep abyss, they would learn that it was the tower abandoned by God. The protagonist had been given a time limit of 1 year to explore the dungeon, and he had set his goal to reach the 56th floor, even though he did not know whether the journey would be easy or difficult. He knew he had to prepare his equipment properly before venturing inside. At that moment, he was holding a gun with several bullets placed nearby. Suya recalled his meeting with a man who had wondered whether he was making the right decision. The man had frankly asked Suya to go to another world. Suya had agreed, although his face had turned pale at the time. He had accepted the proposal on the condition that he would receive the money. The man had revealed that he was aware of Suya's problems concerning his younger sister, which was why he had contacted him. He had already transferred the necessary documents and had informed Suya that he would be leaving in 2 days. He had also warned that if Suya failed to return, a large sum of money would be given to his sister as compensation to ensure her silence. Suya had looked at the balance, which amounted to approximately 96.38 million. And the man had asked whether he had any complaints. Suya had simply denied having any. After everything had been arranged, Suya prepared himself as the portal was about to open. He had been informed that once the portal was ready, he would have to jump into it immediately, along with the container and the machine unit. He recalled that the existence of the other world had already been confirmed in 1946, and in 1951, major nations had deployed a massive army to that area. However, a far greater tragedy had followed, something humanity had never anticipated. The truth had only come to light after a certain whistleblower's book was published. Later, in 1956, a newly deployed and even larger army had been completely annihilated. The only surviving account had come from the former commander of that force. As Suya leaped into the portal, he found himself thinking about the possibility of gods existing in that world. A deep sense of unease settled within him. Although he had accepted the offer in an instant for the sake of his younger sister, he now felt the weight of his decision. At present, he was dragging a massive container, realizing he had no choice but to carry on. He reflected on the reasons for his current predicament. First, half of the container that had arrived with them had already been destroyed. Second, 5 of the individuals who had jumped in alongside him had gone missing. Lastly, and most critically, the 3 machina units, their most important AI machines, had all been destroyed. Suya still had no idea what had caused such devastation. While examining the damaged equipment, he noticed that at least one unit still had its B4 core intact, which served as the heart of the system. Originally developed in 1957 as a domestic assistant AI, the machina had far more advanced functions. However, this realization only added to Suya's growing list of concerns. As he continued his work, a machine behind him informed him that he was using the peg incorrectly and proceeded to explain the proper method. It also notified him that the miso soup was already boiling and advised him to extract the broth from the dried sardines first. Suya was stunned, as he had believed all the machines were broken. Suddenly, the machine underwent a change, activating the human aid system along with the combat program known as Izola. Upon activation, it requested all current project contributors to cooperate. Suya then realized that the machina possessed numerous support functions designed to assist humans, and among those functions was the Izola combat program. Izola requested that Suya provide a damage report following their jump through the portal. Suya reported that everyone except him had gone missing. He also explained that he had explored a 5-kilometer radius around the landing site but had not found a single clue. He then questioned whether calling for reinforcements would result in any support being sent. Izola responded that it was highly improbable, explaining that opening a portal required an enormous amount of energy and that another portal could not be opened for 7,920 hours. Izola further informed him that it would deploy reconnaissance bugs across a 20-kilometer radius around the dungeon area. Suya attempted to order Izola to search specifically for the missing team members, but Izola rejected the command. It stated that there had never been a recorded instance of individuals being found after going missing during a portal jump, and therefore they were presumed dead. Izola then confirmed Suya's status as the remaining team member and calculated that, based on the current resources and his individual capability, the probability of successfully completing the project stood at only 0.2%. It added that, according to the 24th AI law, all machina unit resources could be reallocated toward ensuring the survival of human life. When Izola suggested abandoning the project in favor of survival, Suya firmly refused. He insisted that they would continue, stating that they had come too far to give up. He argued that abandoning the mission simply because the odds were low would render everything meaningless. Isola then stated that he would suspend the auxiliary personality and reactivate the main system, wishing Suya good luck. Once the main system was fully restored, the Machina reported that they were no longer alone and that there was another presence nearby. Suya turned in confusion and noticed someone standing behind him. He was startled, as the figure did not appear entirely human. Despite his uncertainty, Suya offered the stranger some food. The man expressed surprise upon learning that Suya had come from a distant place. He remarked that the food tasted exceptionally good and admitted that it had been a long time since he had last eaten a proper meal on land. Suya realized that the man was a fisherman and asked whether he would like the soup to be warmed further. The fisherman declined, explaining that his race was weak against heat and that the soup was already hot enough for them. Suya understood that Japanese was unlikely to be a global language in that world, so he asked how the fisherman was able to communicate with him so easily. The fisherman revealed that he was a priest, and although he was an inhabitant of the deep abyss, he had received the blessing of Babel. Suya wondered what Babel was. The fisherman assumed that a foreigner would not know about it and explained in simple terms that Babel was his god, the god among the gods. He said that he had prayed to be granted the ability to communicate with other races. As long as someone spoke with the intention of communicating with him, he would be able to understand most of their words. As they continued sitting together, Suya wondered whether everyone in that world possessed such an ability. The fisherman replied that it was actually quite rare. He explained that only those who formed a contract with the god could receive such a blessing. Suya felt that this was encouraging news. He thought that if he could communicate with the inhabitants of that world, it might be possible for him to make allies and explore the ruins more effectively. The fisherman then presented an object to Suya, asking him to accept it as a token of appreciation from an apostle of Grisness, such as himself, to a guest. He added that if Suya refused to accept it, they would become enemies the next time they met. Suya happily accepted the gift and said that he would offer something in return. He then showed the fisherman a pair of small sunglasses, explaining that they would darken one's vision slightly while still allowing clear sight. The fisherman took the sunglasses and put them on. After looking around, he expressed surprise and delight. He remarked that he needed to return soon, otherwise his grandchild would surely scold him. He stood up and asked how long Suya intended to stay there. Suya replied that he planned to remain for 1 year or less and asked whether camping in that area was prohibited. The fisherman assured him that it would not be a problem if he stayed for that duration. He added that it was the first time an inhabitant of the land had not screamed upon seeing him and had even offered him food. He introduced himself as Ghettobato from Mojubafur. Suya introduced himself in return. Ghettobato explained that their territory extended up to 6 stalts from the river. He then pointed toward the vast area ahead and stated that stepping beyond their territory would lead into the kingdom of Lemuria, while the Hyers region belonged to the elves. He warned Suya not to even consider going to Himu, stating firmly that doing so would almost certainly result in his death. Suya thanked Ghettobato for his help, after which the fisherman leaped away and disappeared from sight. Isola informed Suya that the current probability of mission success had increased to 0.6%. Suya felt pleased that the figure had risen, even if only slightly. Afterward, he headed toward the market area, where he was astonished by the lively atmosphere and the variety of activities taking place. He wore his AI glasses, which activated the long-range navigation system and confirmed that the signal remained stable. The target, the Odorigi Spire, was still 2 kilometers away. He remarked that it was still quite distant, and assumed it only appeared closer because of its immense size. Continuing forward, Suya eventually arrived at the designated area. Machina reported that he had reached the first floor. Suya noticed numerous portals and was informed by Machina that the surrounding fields were stable. It further analyzed that the portals appeared to be based on technology originating from that other world. Suya approached a receptionist and stated that it was his first time there, asking where he should line up. The receptionist instructed him to begin by registering as a new adventurer. She pointed toward another counter and explained that the inspection required to obtain dungeon exploration permission was conducted there, advising him to proceed accordingly. When Suya reached the counter, Machina observed that even foreigners seemed to be accepted. Suya remarked that he only needed to find a party and aim for the 56th floor so that he could finally begin exploring the dungeon. However, the attendant rejected his request and informed him that he would not be allowed to enter the dungeon. Shocked, Suya asked for the reason. She explained that since he had not formed a contract with any god, she could not issue him a dungeon exploration permit. Therefore, he would not be permitted to enter, and she asked for his understanding. Feeling disheartened, Suya left the counter. Makina commented that the situation was indeed unfavorable. However, it reminded him that the receptionist had offered to accompany him the following day to seek out a god with whom he could form a contract. Makina concluded that the situation was likely to improve starting the next day. Suya agreed and reflected that he was fortunate to possess sufficient funds. He believed he would be able to exchange the metal rod he carried for currency in that world, so money would not be an issue. Later, as he ate, he found the food exceptionally delicious. Although it was simply seasoned, it reminded him of kebab. He wondered whether the meat was chicken or pork and found himself growing increasingly curious about the ingredients of that world. All of a sudden, Suya's goggles warned him that a hostile presence had been detected. He wondered how many there were. The system informed him that 3 people had been following him since the exchange center. After calculating their positions and initiating the targeting sequence, a countdown for the contract began from 5. When it reached 1, Suya reloaded his weapon and prepared himself. A few men suddenly surrounded him, and one of them demanded that he hand over his money if he wanted to leave unharmed. In response, Suya threw a coin toward the man, struck him with his gun, and then fired at the others, neutralizing them all. The goggles then alerted him that someone else was approaching, and he assumed it was one of the nearby residents drawn by the sound of gunfire. He was instructed to activate the locator display and run away. Meanwhile, an unknown presence was silently watching him. The next day, Suya arrived late, and the lady informed him that it was already past noon. He addressed her by name Iveta and wondered whether it had happened again and why she was there. Iveta replied that it was because the west gate was the one most people used. Suya clarified that that was not what he had meant. She noticed the necklace and asked whether it was from the fishman, assuming that he had been camping outside the city. Suya denied it and questioned why she had gone out of her way to wait for him outside, especially since he had told her the previous day that he would come to see her. She trembled slightly in annoyance and explained that it was her first job, which was why she had become excited and gotten ahead of herself, asking whether he had any problem with that. Suya immediately bowed, denied having any issue, thanked her, and apologized as well. Suya then asked her as they were walking whether the gods of that world would even make a contract with a foreigner like him. She replied that the gods did not choose their favorites based on race and added that there had been examples in the past of foreigners being contracted by a god. Hearing that, Suya felt grateful toward the gods. Iveta then pointed out a place and explained that it was the best option for beginner adventurers. She said that it was dedicated to the god of adventurers, who had left behind many legends, and that the place was known as Window Vernical. She further explained that if he could form a contract at the shrine, he would be allowed to explore the dungeon. Suya thought it looked like a tavern and remarked that it seemed to be one, but she corrected him by insisting that it was a shrine. Even when he pointed out that people were drinking alcohol inside, she maintained that it was indeed a shrine, saying that it welcomed new adventurers, turned their curiosity into power, transformed fame into stories, and eventually shaped those stories into legends. A man then asked Suya whether he had the courage to face hardships, warning him that there would be no turning back. Despite this, Suya still thought the place was nothing more than a tavern. He noticed that the man placed some food on the table, and Iveta began eating enthusiastically. The man told her to calm down and asked how long she intended to keep behaving like an adventurer now that she had become a member of the guild. She apologized, explaining that she simply could not help herself. From this, Suya concluded that Iveta had once been an adventurer. The man then turned to Suya and asked whether he was the foreigner Iveta had mentioned, the one who wanted to become a new adventurer, and suggested that they proceed with forming the contract. Suya agreed, wondering whether it was truly that simple. The man introduced himself as Pasta Oru Rajwa, the priest of that area responsible for recruiting new believers. He extended his hand toward Suya, showed him a book, and asked whether he possessed the resolve never to give up until death. He instructed Suya to place his hand on the book and state his name if he truly had such determination. Suya placed his hand on the book and stated his name, upon which the book began to glow. However, Pasta soon realized that the ritual had failed. Suya was shocked when the priest asked whether he had any dream. After hesitating, Suya admitted that he did. Pasta then explained that adventurers were people who yearned for something seemingly unreachable, and that the god accepted only those whose dreams were so bold that other gods might laugh at them. He concluded that Suya did not possess such a dream, and that, in truth, he was not suited to become an adventurer, advising him to try somewhere else instead. Suya appeared disappointed, and Pasta told him that for someone like him, there was still the new Window Vernicals contract available, which he could obtain immediately for the low price of 1 gold coin. After that, Suya tried approaching several other guards, but he was rejected everywhere. He stretched his body and remarked that there had seemed to be some good chances, yet he had ended up being turned down by all of them. Meanwhile, Iveta was sitting against a wall, looking dejected and blaming herself for not being of any help to him. Suya told her that she had already helped him a lot and that it was simply his bad luck. However, she insisted that she had not produced any results. In response, Suya said that everyone had days like that in life and that it was no different from when adventurers explored a dungeon. He suggested that they should go eat something and offered to treat her. She stood up, saying she understood, but added that she would not hold back. Suya noticed that her mood seemed to change very quickly. Suddenly, someone commented that making a girl lower her head in a place like that was wrong, and questioned what was wrong with Suya. Both of them looked around, wondering where the voice had come from. To his shock, Suya noticed a cat nearby, which said it was over there and added that it seemed he had misunderstood the situation since the girl appeared to be doing fine. Suya was stunned that a cat was speaking. At that moment, he saw that Iveta was trembling. She said that she would wait for him at the counter the next day and that she would accept his offer to treat her then. Immediately afterward, she ran away, leaving Suya confused about what had happened. The cat approached and remarked that she was just a small, dead-horned girl, and that it was not as though he intended to suck out her soul. It then mockingly referred to Suya as a dumb-faced person. Suya wondered how he could possibly help a talking cat. The cat introduced herself as Miss Ronica and explained that she had witnessed what Suya had done the previous day when he drove away the thugs, adding that he had handled it well. Suya then realized that someone had been watching him. Ms. Ronica went on to say that although Suya could only atone for the sin of interrupting her sleep with his life, she would now serve him for the rest of his life. Hearing that, Suya turned to leave and stated that he would return home as he had a busy day ahead of him the next day. Ms. Ronica followed Suya and told him that she was willing to spare his life. Suya felt her clinging to him and shouted that he did not care about any of that. In response, Ms. Ronica said that she would offer him more lenient terms and proposed that if he gave her some food, she would forgive him. Suya was utterly confused as the cat acted as though she could no longer move, claiming that she had reached her limit. However, he noticed that she had simply collapsed on her own, which made him wonder if she was truly starving. Ms. Ronica then revealed that it had been 15 years since she had last eaten anything. Feeling guilty about leaving her behind, Suya asked whether she would be fine coming to his place instead. She replied that it could not be helped and decided to accompany him. The next day, while Suya was preparing food, Ghettobato arrived. Suya invited him to have breakfast, explaining that he had made agillo, a dish prepared by boiling seafood in oil. Since he thought Ghettobato was not good with hot food, he had already allowed one portion to cool down beforehand. Ghettobato expressed his gratitude for the consideration. As Suya served the meal, he explained that Ghettobato had been the one who initially helped him, so he had felt obliged to return the favor. He added that he had been surprised that Ghettobato had given him such high-quality clams and shrimp for free. Ghettobato responded that Suya was too modest and explained that for people like him, who rarely used fire, such food was a rare delicacy and quite valuable. However, he added that to him, it was worth only small change, less than a single gold coin, and that he would have thrown it away if Suya had refused to accept it. Suya asked once again whether there was any particular reason they were unable to accept silver or copper coins. Just then, Miss Ronica appeared, commenting that the aroma was delightful and asking for her breakfast. Ghettobato was startled to see the cat, and Suya introduced her. Ghettobato was even more surprised to discover that she could speak. Suya casually remarked that it seemed female cats in that world were capable of talking. He then showed that he had already set aside a portion of food for Ms. Ronica, and she began eating. Meanwhile, Ghettobato felt that her manner of speaking was somewhat familiar and wondered where he had heard the name Miss Ronica before. At that moment, Ms. Ronica glanced at her plate and was shocked to see how small the portion was. Suya explained that it was merely leftover fish fillet and added that he would take it back if she did not want it. Without hesitation, Ms. Ronica grabbed it and began eating anyway, while Ghettobato continued pondering her name. The following day, Suya and Iveta once again failed to form a contract with any god. Iveta began writing a letter stating that the outcome was more or less what they had expected. Suya admitted that he had hoped for a slightly better result, but Iveta hinted that she had an idea and said she would explain it after finishing her meal. She then called out to the master of the establishment and ordered salted grilled dungan pork, an extra-large serving of stir-fried mountain vegetables, stone-grilled crab oil, and super soft honey bread, 3 portions of each. Suya was shocked, realizing that he would be the one paying for all of it. As she began eating enthusiastically, Suya mentioned that he had brought the cat from the previous day home with him. Iveta reacted with shock, claiming that such creatures had rough tongues and sharp eyes and that they could suck out a person's soul. Suya wondered whether she truly hated cats. She continued eating heartily, saying she enjoyed the food and that she had once been a skilled adventurer, though she remained hesitant about the cat. Suddenly, Makina emitted a beeping sound, and Suya wondered whether something was wrong. He received a message instructing him to return immediately because the camp had been attacked. When Suya rushed to check, he confirmed that the attack had indeed occurred. He ordered Makina to activate the odd eye. Although the voice command was acknowledged, the device reported that the function was unrecognized and advised him to consult the manufacturer's support if he intended to use the latest tool. Suya then ordered a forced activation of Izola. Upon activation, Izola reported that the probability of success was 30%. Suya asked the commander to perform a parse scan and indicate any living organisms as red points. Izola responded that the scan was being executed but that no living organisms were detected within a 100-meter radius. Suya then asked who had attacked them. Izola replied that 3 men were responsible and that they had taken the machine, the medicine container, and other equipment. Shocked, Suya asked whether Izola knew their current location. Izola answered that a tracer had been placed on one of the attackers and that his location would appear on the map. At that moment, rain began to fall. Suya also discovered that Ms. Ronica had been killed, which confused him because the PARS scan had detected no living beings. Izola explained that its functionality had dropped to 5% and advised Suya to hide until the system recovered, warning him not to act recklessly without support. However, Suya stated that both containers were extremely valuable to him and that he had no choice but to retrieve them. He added that he had memorized the location and still possessed some gunpowder. Though he claimed he was making a calm decision, he apologized to Izola, admitting that he was about to do something reckless. The scene then shifted to the 3 men who were hiding. As they sat together, they suddenly heard a sound. When they looked toward the window, a gold coin fell inside, leaving them confused. In the next moment, Suya burst through the door and began firing his gun at them. Several of the men were paralyzed, and he aimed his weapon at another, stating that he had something to ask them. It was then that he realized they were the same 3 men from earlier. One of them began laughing and remarked that Suya was merely using a weapon from another world, admitting that it was unusual, but warning him not to underestimate adventurers. Suddenly, another man struck Suya with a stool, causing him to fall before hitting him again with a club-like object. That man commented that this was exactly why people from other worlds were so helpless. Suya was bewildered. He wondered how they were still able to move after being shot with an assault rifle and questioned whether such resilience was normal. The men then attacked him with magic, declaring that a toy like his weapon could not truly harm them. Their leader drew his sword and slashed toward Suya, stating that it was time for him to die. Shocked by the turn of events, Suya realized that he had been the one underestimating the adventurers and that he should not have looked down on them. Suya came out injured and remembered that he was currently in the Adventurer City, where it was common for adventurers to fight one another. Whenever such conflicts occurred, it was the responsibility of the Adventurers Association to resolve them. He had learned all of this from Iveta. However, he was confused about who would handle disputes between an adventurer and a non-adventurer. As Suya was being imprisoned while dragging 3 people who were tied with a chain, a lady was shocked to see the scene. As she expressed her shock, another person told her to step back and warned her not to get involved with that man. Suya then asked where the nearest guard post was, stating that he would give them something in return. The second lady shouted, wondering who would ever get involved with someone like Suya. However, the first lady told him that there was a tavern decorated with horns, and if he continued straight from there, he would find a guard post nearby. She also said that before going any further, she should at least use healing magic on him, but the second lady immediately shouted at her to stop. Suya apologized to them and thanked them sincerely. Shortly after, he collapsed. When he opened his eyes, he heard someone saying that the situation was not good and questioning what Suya had done wrong. Others were telling the lady to stop standing up for him and to think about their own position instead. As Suya slowly opened his eyes, he saw that it was Iveta, along with another woman. Iveta looked surprised to see him awake. She asked him if he was fine. Suya wondered why he had been imprisoned. Then he remembered that he had passed out in front of the guard post. In truth, he had thought that he was going to die, but somehow he had survived. Suddenly, his body was overwhelmed with intense pain. A guard standing nearby mentioned that Suya was fortunate, explaining that if an elf passing by had not intervened, he would have lost his arm. The elf had cast healing magic on him. Suya then wondered whether it had been the same two girls he had met earlier. The guard apologized for speaking to Suya so bluntly just after he had woken up, but informed him that he had been charged with inflicting severe injuries on 3 adventurers who were currently in no condition to speak. Suya requested an opportunity to clarify the situation, explaining that the 3 adventurers had robbed him. The guard asked whether he had recovered his belongings or possessed any proof to support his claim. Suya admitted that he had neither and felt frustrated, thinking that Machina should have been able to provide evidence, but her system was currently inactive. The guard further added that Suya did not have any identification, and in short, someone who was not contracted with any god was considered a criminal. Faithless individuals like him were usually taken to the council in the central continent, where they were either executed or used as experimental subjects. Suya was shocked and wondered if it was some kind of witch hunt. The guard continued by saying that he did not wish to send Suya to such a place. He explained that the issue could be easily resolved if Suya were registered as an adventurer. Therefore, he intended to ask the 2 women from the Adventurer Association whether they could register Suya as an adventurer, even if only temporarily. However, the woman standing beside Iveta refused. She introduced herself as Solshia, the head of the Lemuria Adventurer Association, and stated that she could not make any exceptions, as doing so would damage the integrity of the association. After saying this, she turned to leave, mentioning that she had other matters to attend to. Iveta stopped her and requested that she wait, asking her to grant them at least 1 day so they could try appealing to the gods in the city center once more. Solshia then remarked that Suya had turned 3 adventurers into what looked like meatballs and had dragged them through the city. She added that if Iveta truly believed there was still a god willing to accept him, it would be surprising. Hearing this, both the guard and Suya fell silent, and the guard muttered that he might as well prepare a boat for the central continent. Suya felt a deep sense of despair, thinking that his adventure might have ended there. Suddenly, they heard someone excuse herself, saying that she had oversolskjaered their conversation and that the solution to their predicament was quite simple. Suya turned around inside the jail and was stunned to see Miss Ronica. She stated that the fool had buried her so deeply that it had taken her half a day to dig herself out. Suya was utterly shocked because he had believed she was already dead. She replied that if something like that were enough to kill her, she would have died many times already. Suya then reflected that cats from another world were truly extraordinary, and wondered if it was because they possessed something like 9 lives. Miss Ronica remarked that it seemed Suya had been searching for a god with whom to form a contract. Suya wondered whether she could introduce him to such a god. She called him a fool, and told him that he should form a contract with her instead. Suya was confused and questioned whether she was truly a god. Solshia then explained that long ago, on the eastern continent, there had been 3 kingdoms blessed with prosperity and splendor. However, those 3 kingdoms had been destroyed by a single woman named Ronica, who had ascended to godhood through trickery and other evil means. Solshia added that she had heard Ronica's worshippers were arrested and her cult had been dismantled. Miss Ronica responded that if something so trivial could make her disappear, she would not deserve to be called a god. She added that she had survived by eating countless rats that roamed the prisons. She then asked Suya whether he truly wished to form a contract with her, stating that she knew he desperately wanted one. Suya agreed. However, she continued by saying that she was not entirely convinced, since he had always been rude to her. She told him that it would depend on how he asked. Suddenly, Suya knelt before Miss Ronica and begged her to form a contract with him. Everyone present was shocked. Suya thought to himself that this was the ultimate technique he had learned in Japan. Miss Ronica commented that it was embarrassing and told him to stop. She said they would proceed using the traditional method that had been passed down since ancient times. First, she instructed Suya to kneel on one knee, place his right hand on the ground, and rest his left hand on his right shoulder. She also told him to lower his head. Suya followed her instructions obediently. She further stated that he was not allowed to look at her until she permitted him to do so. While Suya maintained that posture, he began to feel something strange. He then heard a voice, one that sounded like Iveta's, yet carried the presence of the black flame, speaking to him. The voice asked whether he would become her sword to fulfill her desire. It declared that there would be no honor in such a blade, no glory in the blood it spilled, and no peace for his soul. Even so, if he still wished to serve her, he was told to answer with silence. The voice continued, asking whether he, a disgraced man, would use his power to do what must be done, whether he would take everything necessary, steal what had to be stolen, plot against kings, and even slay heroes if required. It repeated that if he still wished to serve, despite all of that, he should respond with silence, and she would accept that silence as his answer. Suya then heard what sounded like a solemn chant, describing him as swordless, faithless, and a non-believer. At that moment, he felt that he no longer feared weakness, nor did he long for glory. He realized that he would no longer cling to dreams. The voice proclaimed that she would forgive his sins and his deception. Even if he were to become a source of disaster, she would forgive him. His blood, his bones, and even his hatred would no longer belong to him. They would belong to her. After that, she told Suya to open his eyes, informing him that the contract had been successfully formed and welcoming him as her follower. The guard commented that it was only to be expected from the most beautiful woman in the world, remarking that she was extremely gentle. Suya felt confused upon hearing that. The guard then stated that the remaining matters were now the responsibility of the Adventurers Guild and asked everyone to step outside. Soon after, Suya was released. As Suya walked with Miss Ronica, she asked about his plan regarding the containers and the rest of his belongings. Suya replied that, according to his tracking device, the containers were still in that area. He explained that whether the thieves intended to sell or trade the goods, they would need some kind of distribution route. From that perspective, he believed there was a strong possibility that a merchant had hired those adventurers to steal the items in the first place. Miss Ronica then questioned whether that was the reason the goods had been stored in the warehouse. Suddenly, Suya's machina began to make a sound. He looked toward the warehouse and noticed a man standing outside. Suya asked who owned the place. The man replied that it belonged to the Sava Night Owl Merchant Association, explaining that they operated a large weapon shop on the main road and also purchased items from customers. He added that it was a prominent establishment and that Suya would easily recognize it if he visited. When Suya arrived at the shop, a man greeted him and asked what kind of weapon he was looking for. Suya replied that he wished to meet the manager. The staff inquired about the nature of his business, and Suya stated that he was interested in the foreign goods they possessed. The statement surprised everyone present. Suya was then escorted inside to meet the manager, who mentioned that he had already heard about him and remarked that Suya had reportedly rolled 3 adventurers into something like a ball. Suya clarified that he merely wanted the return of the items that had been stolen from him. The manager questioned what he was referring to. Suya responded by asking what the manager would say if he claimed that the stolen goods were currently stored in one of their warehouses. The manager replied that the situation was unfortunate, adding that Suya appeared to be an intelligent and capable individual with remarkable knowledge and strength. However, he pointed out that Suya was alone, and with a single command, he could have the warehouse cleared before Suya could react, even if he sought assistance. He implied that Suya's only practical option was to remain silent about knowing the location of his goods. Suya responded that it would be meaningless to retrieve the items if they were only going to be stolen from him again. The manager laughed and said that Suya was perceptive. He suggested that next time, Suya should bring the goods directly to him while he still had them, promising to purchase them at a generous price. Suya replied that he did not possess such items at the moment, but asked whether he could say one more thing. The manager agreed. Suya then asked him to open the window. After the window was opened, Suya approached it, looked toward a particular warehouse, and indicated that the goods were located there. He then activated his device, stating that the items stolen from him were registered under his name and that he could prove ownership in case of emergency. He further explained that the device had a self-destruction function. In the next instant, he triggered it, causing the warehouse to explode and collapse. The manager stood frozen in shock and asked what Suya had just done. Suya calmly replied that he had blown the warehouse to pieces. He added that if they possessed explosive magic, he had merely done something similar, and he was certain that everything inside the warehouse was now completely destroyed. The man was visibly shocked and trembling after witnessing the destruction. Suya calmly stated that he would take his leave, adding that he still needed to register as an adventurer. He informed the man that he would return the next day at the same time and advised him to be prepared. As Suya left, Ms. Ronica remarked that he was truly evil. Suya responded that she was in no position to judge, and whether his actions were right or wrong, he believed he had delivered justice. Miss Ronica clung to his shoulder and commented that crushing evil was, in itself, still an act of evil. Suya then went to Avetta to complete his registration. She handed him a temporary registration card and informed him that he would be allowed to enter the dungeon 2 mornings later. She advised him to prepare himself until then. Suya thanked her. Iveta further mentioned that an explosion had occurred at one of the warehouses and warned him to stay away from that area since it was dangerous. Suya agreed and said he would avoid it. The following day, Machina reactivated, and Isola informed Suya that he had confirmed the situation and that Machina agreed with the plan. However, Isola appeared to have concerns and stated that he wished to question Suya's decision. He asked him to provide a valid reason for blowing up the weapon containers. Suya explained that it would have been impossible for him to manage and protect all of them simultaneously, which was why he had taken that action. Isola suggested that he could have hired bodyguards, but Suya replied that trust could not be bought with money. Isola then stated that if the task had merely involved monitoring the goods, a Machina unit would have been sufficient. Suya asked whether Isola would have been willing to harm humans if necessary. Isola denied this and explained that according to the second rule governing AI, they were not permitted to take direct action that would harm humans. Suya then asked whether his decision had been wrong. Isola responded that it had been the correct choice under the circumstances, even if the actions themselves appeared morally wrong. He added that he would accompany Suya to the meeting later that day. However, Suya suggested that Machina should handle it instead, and clarified that it was not due to any lack of trust in Isola's abilities. Isola seemed saddened by this response, which left Suya confused. Suya then addressed both Isola and Machina and ordered them to remove the absolute command restriction. He introduced Miss Ronica, explaining that she was the god with whom he had formed a contract, and stated that he wanted Isola to obey her commands as well whenever possible. Isola agreed. After some time, Ghettobato arrived and called out to Suya, mentioning that he had been surprised when he came by the other day. He explained that Suya had been nowhere to be found and that the tent had been in complete disarray, which had worried him greatly. He asked where Suya had gone. Suya apologized for causing him concern and explained that he had been planning to negotiate some business matters. However, before continuing, he asked Ghettobato about the 2 containers and inquired how much he had earned from selling them. After the incident, Suya explained what had happened and said that he had investigated the area around the camp. From his observations, he concluded that the adventurers who had attacked the camp had not stolen the containers. The containers were built to be watertight, so they should have floated on the water. Although they were too heavy to be carried easily, he could not find any signs that they had been dragged across the ground. He also found no evidence of anyone using a cart or horses to transport them. Suya further noted that Ghettobato knew well the times when he would not be at the camp. Even though he had no concrete proof that Ghettobato had been there, he had enough reasons to be suspicious of him. If his understanding was correct, then the scene shifted to a day earlier when Suya and Ghettobato had been sitting together. Suya had mentioned that he had forgotten to ask why Ghettobato needed money so badly, and whether the bounty from the sea was not enough to sustain him. He had also pointed out that Ghettobato had once said his people had little reason to make contact with humans, which had somehow continued to bother him. With hesitation, Ghettobato had revealed that he had 5 granddaughters. He had explained that the youngest one had once saved a merchant during a storm. After helping him reach the shore safely, she had not stopped talking about the man, behaving as though she were mentally unwell. One day, that granddaughter had vanished. She had stolen a treasure capable of changing one's appearance in exchange for something valuable, and it had been obvious that she had gone after that man. Suya had thought that the story sounded very similar to that of a certain mermaid princess. Ghettobato had said that he did not mind as long as his granddaughter was happy. However, one day he had suddenly been summoned for a business negotiation with some humans. Those humans had been from Eliomia West Phoenix Company, and they had come to sell one of their goods to him, 1 mermaid for 4,000 gold coins. The scene returned to the present, where Suya stated that Ghettobato was a kind and warm-hearted person who cherished his family. He said that he was certain Ghettobato had not been pretending when he showed concern for him, and that was precisely why Ghettobato had been easy to manipulate. Suya clarified that he had no intention of harming him, but he wanted Ghettobato to tell him how much he had been paid. After a while, Ghettobato admitted that he had received 20 gold coins. Suya thanked him and added that he wished to ask one more favor. In the event that he were killed, he wanted Ghettobato to throw Isola into the ocean. He also said that he would not mind if it were only a small amount, but he hoped Ghettobato would give Miss Ronica some fish. He acknowledged that it was not much, but asked Ghettobato to accept everything as his token of gratitude. Ghettobato was shocked and wondered whether Suya truly believed him. Suya confirmed that he did, which made Ghettobato feel even more guilty. Suya then declared that, in the name of the wicked god Miss Ronica, he forgave Ghettobato. The next day, outside a warehouse, Suya arrived with Solskjaer and a guard. They found themselves standing before a large crowd. The guard asked whether Suya had truly gone through with everything the previous day and was now continuing the matter further. Suya replied that he was now an adventurer, and then questioned why Solskjaer was there. Solskjaer explained that if she left him alone, Iveta would accompany him instead and make the situation even worse. Suya felt apologetic upon hearing that. They went inside to talk, where a woman introduced herself as Horsald, the head of Savas Night Owl Company, stating that she was present in place of her foolish son. She apologized for what her son had done the previous day. Suya thought that it was only natural for the head of the company to finally step forward. The guard remarked that the company was under suspicion of theft and robbery and asked whether Horsald knew anything that might justify such allegations. Horsald denied it. The guard then asked whether she was aware that the explosion in one of their warehouses had been caused by Suya. Suya admitted that he had placed explosives among the goods that had been stolen from him. Horsald responded that they had merely been storing those goods on behalf of another company and thus they had not known they were stolen. She claimed that she had only just realized they were dealing with stolen property. When the guard asked which company they had been holding the goods for, she replied that she could not reveal the name of their client as it would damage public trust in their company. However, she said there was something they needed to address. She continued by explaining that the warehouse had been severely damaged. Inside, there had been numerous goods that had already been paid for by other adventurers. The explosion had also injured employees who had been outside the warehouse and had caused damage to nearby warehouses owned by other companies. Therefore, in compensation for their company's losses, the damage to surrounding warehouses, and medical expenses for injured employees, she demanded a total of 9,705 gold coins. Since the amount was too large for one person to bear, she stated that they would demand the remaining sum from the Adventurers Guild. Solskjaer was shocked and pulled Suya aside, anxiously asking what he intended to do, as the demanded amount was nearly equivalent to the annual maintenance budget of the guild. Suya told her to calm down, explaining that the incident had occurred before he had registered as an adventurer, so she could devise an excuse to avoid being held responsible. Suya then raised his hand and stated that the goods which had exploded were originally his and had been stolen. He argued that the company had used the issue of public trust as an excuse to conceal criminals. Since they had relied on that very trust as justification, he insisted that they should instead compensate him for the goods stolen from him. Horsald responded that she would request the gods to present themselves in order to establish a fair settlement. The guard speculated that she was referring to the Minerva sisters' gods. Horsald raised her hand toward the sky, holding a leaf, and called upon her reserved god, Gravius. She prayed that he would share his wisdom with her, his believer, and use his keen eyes to enforce justice upon the twisted world of humanity. At that moment, a bird appeared and asked what she intended to use the keen eyes of Gravius for. Horsald requested that he oversee the negotiation between her and the foreigner, Suya. Gravius then turned his attention to Suya and stated that he presumed Suya was the foreigner who would be negotiating with one of his followers. He asked Suya to state his name and the god he served. Suya introduced himself and declared that he was a follower of Ronica. Gravius wondered whether Suya's god had not attained divinity or authority. Suya responded that his god was currently asleep, so in her place, he had brought someone else. He then placed a pair of glasses on the table from which light began to emit. A girl appeared and greeted everyone present. Makana announced that she would be responsible for providing support to Suya and explained that she was a type of fairy in their original homeworld. Suya thought to himself that he was merely projecting Makana through a hologram, while Horsald likely still believed she could extort money from him. Horsald then addressed Gravius and presented the list of goods they had lost, along with the compensation they demanded. After reviewing it, Gravius stated that 9,705 gold coins seemed fair. However, Makana objected, asserting that the accurate value should be 9,802 gold coins, 3 silver, and 6 copper. The guard, who was seated nearby, remarked that it was an impressively precise figure, especially considering that they had only recently arrived in that world. Gravius then turned to Suya and stated that he had noticed Suya had his eyes elsewhere, referring to a familiar. Suya internally acknowledged that, as expected of a god, Gravius had detected the bug drone he had deployed. However, he was satisfied as he had already gathered all the information he needed. Gravius commented that it was not entirely fair for Suya to rely on human power, resources, and knowledge to produce such results, though he admitted that there was technically nothing wrong with it. He then confirmed that the revised fine for Horsald would be 9,802 gold coins, 3 silver, and 6 copper. Horsald agreed. Suya then presented his own list and asked Makina to read it aloud. Makina stated that the stolen items included 3 magnifying scopes, 20 AK rifles, and 8 M1911 rifles. It appeared that only dwarves in that world were capable of crafting firearms. Horzald replied that she had heard from her son that Suya had already had the guns appraised and that he even carried one of the smaller firearms himself. In that world, she claimed, such weapons were considered amateur craftsmanship. She had heard that one gun was worth only 100 gold coins, so she offered to double that amount for the smaller rifles. Machina thanked her and calculated that the total would be 3,600 gold coins. Suya then asked about the ammunition. Machina reported that based on her investigation, Suya had not received any ammunition or gunpowder from the dwarves. Horzald explained that 6 years earlier there had been an accident in the warehouse involving a new type of gunpowder developed by the dwarves. Since then, the distribution of gunpowder had been prohibited, so she claimed she could not assign a price to it. Machina responded that in that case, they would not attempt to determine a price for it either. A piece of meat was placed in front of them. Suya reloaded his gun and instructed everyone to cover their ears before firing at it. The shot startled the guard. Machina expressed her hope that they now understood the difference. She explained that smokeless gunpowder, though somewhat similar to the black powder of their world, was fundamentally different. Therefore, she believed it did not fall under the same prohibition. Gravius remarked that the difference was not limited to the gunpowder alone. Machina agreed, but clarified that they had come to that world solely to explore dungeons and had no other ambitions. In particular, they had no intention of using their weapons to start a war. Gravius wondered whether they truly intended to reject what could be the greatest market opportunity for a merchant. However, he stated that he would overlook it. Machina then asked to proceed with the calculations. She mentioned that she had heard of something called a Ronica coin, a coin in which a small enhancement could be embedded to activate magic almost instantaneously. She explained that they were considering pricing each individual bullet at the value of 1 Ronica coin. Since they did not possess magic in their original world, they requested that Gravius determine the value of a single coin. Gravius agreed. Machina then stated that there were 2,580 rounds of 7.62mm ammunition and 300 ACP rounds. Some of Horzald's subordinates began to grow visibly uneasy as she continued. Machina further explained that the current exchange rate was 22 gold coins per Ronica coin. Therefore, the total amount would be approximately 63,360 gold coins. Suddenly, Horzald called out to Gravius and requested that the negotiation be cancelled. Gravius appeared confused and pointed out that she had just asked a god to withdraw from a negotiation midway, asking whether she understood the consequences of such a request. When she confirmed that she did, Gravius angrily called her a fool and declared that he would withhold his blessings from her for an entire year. He mockingly told her to return to selling vegetables if she wished. Afterward, Gravius turned to Machina and Suya and presented 2 leaves. He told them that he would lend them his power, and that if they wished to resume the negotiation at any time, they need only hold up the leaves and call his name. He expressed his hope that they would meet again in the future before disappearing. Horzald then asked Solskjaer and the guard officer to leave her alone with Suya for a while. Once they had departed, she asked Suya what he truly wanted. Suya directly asked who had stolen his containers. She admitted that it had been the Eliomia West Phoenix Company and that her foolish son was friends with the head of that company. She appeared deeply irritated and urged Suya to leave the matter alone. Suya replied that he was not finished. Horzald warned him that 63,360 gold coins was not an amount even an entire kingdom could easily pay. She asked whether he truly intended to make an enemy of the entire guild. Compared to the royal family, she said, Suya was nothing more than a pebble on the roadside. They could strip him of everything and banish him without even leaving him a scrap of clothing. If he did not wish for such a fate, he should stop threatening people and live quietly. Suya questioned what was wrong with that. However, he soon grew furious and declared that he would gladly throw that entire sum into the ocean. He asked her what she thought would happen to the country if it lost such an enormous amount of money, and whether it would still be able to stand on its own. She told him to consider that the country relied heavily on imports from the central continent. Overcome with anger, Suya rushed toward her and shouted that he might be killed for his actions, but she should think about what would happen to everyone else if such financial ruin occurred. The merchant guild, the royalty, and the townspeople would surely curse her, as it would all stem from her company angering a single foreigner. He asked whether they were truly prepared to bear such infamy. He questioned whether she was willing to continue living a fragile, impoverished life hanging by a thread, or whether she wanted to witness bloodshed. He even threatened that he could shoot holes through her arms and legs with ammunition worth 22 gold coins per shot. He demanded that she answer him carefully. Horzald began trembling and asked whether there was anything else he wished to know. Suya asked whether she had hired the adventurers who attacked his camp. She denied it. He then asked whether she had instructed them to rob the fisherman instead. She denied that as well, insisting that they had merely stored goods on behalf of others. Suya remarked that, temporary or not, both she and her son now owed him. He warned that if they attempted to flee, he would use the leaf Gravius had given him. Suya knew it was a major setback. It would have taken only a single bullet to settle matters with that company, and he believed the outcome had likely been influenced by the negotiation that had just taken place. Even so, he felt an unusual unease stirring within him. He absent-mindedly shook the crystal on the table, as if to assert his presence. At that moment, however, he noticed the head of the company trembling in fear. Beside her stood a woman who transformed into a mermaid. It was known that the price she had set for the treasure that granted her legs had been love itself. Suya had also successfully retrieved all of his medical supplies. In that sense, the case was resolved. Although there were still aspects that left him dissatisfied, he understood that the sacrifices made had been her own choice, and he was not in a position to judge or comment on them. Afterward, Suya returned to his camp. On the 6th day, Isola informed him that everything had been retrieved, including all the miscellaneous items. By Suya's order, that weapon would be the last gun he ever brought into that world. When Isola asked whether he was truly certain about that decision, Suya replied that he intended to scrap all the guns, though he might keep a single weapon for himself. However, he admitted that he would not be able to protect the technology behind it. As Isola had pointed out, such technology might very well ignite a war. Afterward, Ghettobato arrived. Suya packed the container and handed it over to him, stating that he was leaving everything in Ghettobato's care. Ghettobato replied that he would let it sink into the deepest part of the ocean. Although many things had happened between them, he expressed his hope that they would meet again someday. Suddenly, Suya collapsed. He wondered what was happening to him, only to realize that the effects of adrenaline had finally worn off. An overwhelming exhaustion washed over him. Isola informed him that it had been 6 days since he had arrived there, and he had not gotten any proper sleep during that time. His vitals were extremely unstable, and Isola strongly recommended that he immediately consume some energy rations and then rest. Suya agreed and thought he would eat dinner before going to sleep. However, as he reached for food, Ms. Ronica told him to simply sleep, insisting that there was no need for him to eat. Suya accepted that advice. While he was sleeping inside the tent, a strange girl appeared and stood silently beside him. The next day, Suya waited for Iveta. She came to him, greeted him good morning, and mentioned that he had arrived very early. She added that arriving early for an appointment was a very good virtue for an adventurer. Suya thought that he had simply gone to bed early and that Machina would not stop blasting loud music to wake him up. Afterward, he collected some supplies from the association. Iveta said that she did not expect any mistakes, but she thought it would still be a good idea to check them. As Suya examined the supplies, he found 2 small bottles attached together and wondered what they were. Iveta asked him for his hair and nails, explaining that she had almost forgotten about them. She took them and placed them into each bottle, saying that although there was no specific rule about it, he should always make sure to keep his checkpoint somewhere others would not see. Suya wondered what she meant by that. She then asked him to wait for a while. Taking out a book, she touched it and began chanting in the name of the destroyer, Iveta, borrowing the name of the beloved Lemuria, and offering a prayer to Window Vernical. She implored Galvanger to entrust a fragment of the miracles seeping from the demon realm to the adventurer. She declared that the world was ruled by knowledge, that knowledge became truth, and that truth which strayed from God became demonized, inferior to humanity and capable of replacing life itself. She then used the Tylos mirror, and while saying Revius, she struck Suya quite hard. Suya was confused by this. Iveta apologized, explaining that although she did not need to hit him so forcefully, she had simply become too excited. Suya thought that she should not hit someone just because she was excited. She then continued by saying that Suya needed to shake the phylactery until it changed color. Suya agreed and began shaking it. As it gradually changed color, Iveta checked it and wondered whether it had worked. She concluded that it could indeed be considered successful. She explained that the red color represented internal magic, while the black indicated external magic. Iveta further explained that the red internal magic represented Suya's regenerative capacity. She told him that as long as he possessed it, his body would automatically regenerate and heal itself, even if his limbs were cut off or his stomach was torn open. Upon hearing this, Suya realized that his headache had disappeared, and he began to understand that this must have been the reason. He also concluded that this was how those people had been able to regenerate. However, Avetta warned him not to rely on it too much, explaining that he would still die if he were decapitated. She added that it could not protect him from poison or parasites. She also cautioned him to be careful and avoid severe injuries when his vial was empty. After that, she explained that the blue color represented external magic, which indicated the amount of magical power Suya could use. She stated confidently that he would be able to see it for himself whenever he used magic. Suya then asked her whether his result was common among people. At first, she hesitated, and while sweating slightly, she admitted that she did not have much information about what was considered common. However, she mentioned that she had once cast the same spell on a pup during training in the past, and the result had been more or less the same as Suya's. Suya reflected on this and thought that his level was apparently the same as that of a pup. The scene shifted to the front of the dungeon, where a man announced that it was the 242nd new adventurer course. He introduced himself as Medam and stated that he would be responsible for instructing them. He then greeted everyone. He looked at Suya, the warrior standing beside him, and the 3 girls, whom he would also be supervising. Suya wondered whether there was any real need to categorize humans by species. Suddenly, Avetta appeared behind Suya and smacked him lightly, telling him to pay attention and listen carefully to Medam. She asked him to make sure he had not forgotten anything and added that if he needed to use the restroom, this would be his chance. She also advised him to run away immediately if things became dangerous. Suya wondered whether she was acting like his mother. Medam then called out to Avetta and asked whether Suya was the foreigner. She confirmed that he was and said that she was counting on Medam to look after him. Suya trembled, feeling deeply embarrassed, especially when he noticed the girls laughing at him. Medam responded that even though Avetta had requested it, he would watch over Suya just as he did with the other adventurers. He then told everyone that hands-on experience was the fastest way to learn and instructed them to follow him. As they moved forward, one of the girls asked Suya about his relationship with Avetta. Suya replied that Avetta had been assigned to him by the association. The girl appeared curious and asked whether Suya had been with Avetta during the Grodwig trial. As they walked through the frightening pathway, Suya explained that during the trial he had only needed to thrust his weapon at the pig-like creature, though it had been extremely difficult. The girl agreed, saying that her spear had not been able to pierce it at all. However, she added that Shuna had easily managed to do so and had even formed a contract with Grodwing. The others grew curious and began discussing it, with some remarking that the topic should not focus on that particular girl but rather on another one. Meanwhile, the magician girl turned to Suya and asked whether he knew what horns was. The magician girl explained that the creature seemed trained, but it was actually a monster originating from the dungeon. She said that people often mistook them for beastkin, but their distinguishing feature was their horn. She warned everyone to be careful, adding that if they encountered an adult of that species inside the dungeon, they would be torn to pieces. However, she also mentioned that the smaller ones could be sold for a good price. If someone had the confidence to train them properly, they could become a powerful addition to a party or even a skilled courtesan. When the first girl objected to this idea, Medam intervened. He stated that Avetta was the property of the king of Lemuria. He added that regardless of her past, she had left behind remarkable achievements as a hunter, and ridiculing her was not appropriate. The magician girl apologized, and the group continued forward. Eventually, they reached the second floor. Medam explained that although they were inside the dungeon, this area was relatively safe, much like the outside. He instructed them to wash themselves immediately after stepping out of the dungeon, explaining that it was necessary to prevent bringing sickness into the city. One of the girls excitedly remarked that the dungeon seemed friendlier than she had expected. Medam responded that this was only true for the lower floors. He explained that the third floor was filled with weak monsters, but the real problems would begin from the fourth floor onward. He then pointed toward the staircase leading downward and stated that the main dungeon effectively began on the fourth floor. After that, he called Suya forward and instructed him to take the lead, form a party of 5 with the others, and proceed down to the 5th floor. He added that he would be waiting for them there. Suya was shocked upon hearing Medam's instruction. He called out, asking Medam to wait, and questioning how he was supposed to manage this. However, he soon realized that Medam had already left. Left with no choice, Suya looked at the map and asked the group whether anyone else would prefer to take the lead instead of him. The second boy stepped forward and asked if it would be all right for him to lead. Suya agreed, and the boy took the map, pointing in one direction and suggesting they proceed that way. However, Suya quickly told him to wait and pointed out that he was holding the map upside down. The boy apologized, explaining that it was his first time seeing a dungeon map, but assured them that he would manage. Suya then decided to take the lead himself. He attempted to use AI and asked Isola to read the map and guide him. However, Isola did not respond. He then tried contacting Machina, but there was no response from her either. Suddenly, a monster lunged at them. The other boy immediately stepped in front of Suya and blocked the attack with his shield. The girl with the sword rushed forward and stabbed the creature. Another monster moved to attack her, but the magician girl struck it with magic and burned it. After defeating it, she explained that the creature was called a chocho. She mentioned that it was her first time seeing one in its natural form, as they often disguised themselves as humans. She also remarked that it contained a large amount of meat. The boy, shocked, wondered whether the city truly consumed such creatures. The magician replied that it was actually very tasty and its eggs were considered a delicacy. She added that nearly 1/3 of the city's food supply came from the dungeon. The knight was stunned and apologized, admitting that he had never seriously considered where the food came from. The magician then asked whether he was from a wealthy family. Another girl stepped forward and remarked that someone from a lower noble family like hers was insignificant in comparison. Meanwhile, Suya and the sword-wielding girl observed the exchange. Suya asked her to stay alert and wondered whether the chocho was considered a strong monster. She replied that its attack had been sudden and asked what he meant. She explained that although they were technically amateurs, they had handled the situation smoothly because they were used to such encounters. Since chocho relied mainly on mimicry, it was categorized as a weak monster, though it could become troublesome if it followed them around. Suya nodded, saying that it had been a good thrust. He also observed that although it should have been their first time fighting together, she had coordinated very well with the knight, and he wondered whether she had trained under someone. Just as she was about to respond, a loud roar echoed through the dungeon. The ground began to shake violently. They all looked ahead and saw a massive monster approaching them. They were all terrified. At the urging of one of the girls, they began to run, and the monster immediately started chasing them. Suya thought that if they could turn a corner and maneuver behind it, they might gain an advantage. However, the knight chose to stand his ground, declaring that a knight should never retreat in the face of danger. The monster struck him with tremendous force, sending him flying through the air before he crashed heavily to the ground. As one of the girls turned back in shock, Suya urgently told her not to look back and to keep running forward. Soon the girls realized there was no path ahead. Suya quickly looked in another direction and instructed them to follow him. The girl with the spear wondered what kind of creature it was and what it could possibly eat to grow so enormous. She speculated that such a beast must devour anything it found. Regardless of its nature, they all agreed that they should not turn back and must continue running. The girl with the sword asked Suya whether he had a plan in mind. He confirmed that he did, but said they first needed to create more distance. The magician girl then threw several seeds onto the ground and began chanting a spell invoking the spirit king of trees and the god of fertility. She prayed for a miracle to restrain the monster. Suddenly, plants burst from the ground, covered in sharp spikes that pierced into the creature's body. Seizing the opportunity, they ran further ahead. However, she warned that the spell would not hold it for long. Suya and the spear-wielding girl eventually reached a corner. Suya took out a cloth and asked her to place her spear firmly against the ground. Confused, she asked what he was planning. He explained that they would lure the monster into the corner, and if the plan failed, at least she might escape while it was distracted by him. She hesitated and replied that it was more likely the creature would simply crush them both, rather than slowly chew on him. Moments later, the monster charged at them. Together, they used all their strength to thrust the spear into its mouth, attempting to stop its advance. The beast began biting down on the weapon, chewing through it as it pushed forward. Suya was bewildered, wondering why it had not yet died. He quickly drew a small dagger and tried to strike it, but its hide was so thick that the blade could not pierce it. They were nearly helpless. Then suddenly, the monster collapsed with a piercing scream. Shuna, the swordswoman, appeared and asked Belle whether she was all right. Belle was stunned to see her and rushed forward, embracing her while expressing immense gratitude. Overwhelmed with relief, her knees gave way. She added that it was also thanks to Suya that she had survived. Suya responded that his plan had only led them into greater danger, and that the true credit belonged to Shuna and Belle. Medem soon arrived, carrying the unconscious knight. He remarked that they were truly remarkable, as even a mid-rank adventurer would have struggled to defeat such a massive dungeon pig. He explained that he had come to check on them after hearing the terrible noise. Impressed by their bravery, he decided that he would accompany them further down the dungeon. The group was overjoyed. Medem then told them to expect a few words of advice from him later, but first they should return through the portal and take a proper bath. Everyone happily agreed. After exiting the dungeon, they celebrated with a small party. Suya thanked everyone for their efforts during their first dungeon exploration and proposed a toast to their health and future success. As they enjoyed food and alcohol, they continued discussing the dungeon and its strange creatures. Meanwhile, Suya felt utterly exhausted. He reflected that their first dungeon exploration had ended unexpectedly. He also realized that they had already reached the 5th floor. However, the true objective lay much deeper. There were still 51 floors remaining. A week had passed since Suya had arrived in that world. He was sitting inside his tent, reflecting on his recent attempt to delve into the dungeon and fight monsters. He realized clearly that he had felt dizzy at the time, overwhelmed by the fact that he was powerless. The only weapon he possessed was a hatchet, and he could not even kill a pig with it. Even if he were to join the party, he knew he would be nothing more than a burden. He understood that he needed another weapon to replace his gun. According to adventurer standards, his physical capabilities were lackluster. He did not even have the strength to swing a sword properly, let alone kill a chocho. Although he had enough muscle to hold a gun, he lacked the strength required to wield a sword effectively. The world was vastly different from what he was used to, yet he did not have the time to train and temper his body. As a result, his options for weapons were extremely limited. With this conclusion in mind, he went to the company that had previously confiscated his guns. When he met the owner, the man and his associates appeared frightened. The owner screamed loudly at first, but Suya explained that he had only come to purchase some goods and asked if they could show him their weapons. When the owner hesitated and turned away, Suya remarked that he would simply leave and go to Eliamea instead. Hearing this, the man immediately apologized for losing his composure and asked whether Suya had come for weapons. Suya confirmed and inquired whether they had a crossbow. The man clarified that what they had was actually a ballista, adding that it was not a popular choice among adventurers. Suya responded that he did not care about its popularity. The man then handed it to Suya. Suya attempted to lift it, but struggled considerably. He stated that he could not even bend the string and questioned whether they were trying to sell him defective goods. The owner insisted that the weapon had been perfectly crafted, but something seemed wrong. He called for assistance. Suddenly, a giant man emerged from behind Suya, startling him. The owner asked the man to pull the string for Suya. The giant twisted it effortlessly and then turned to Suya, asking whether he was an adventurer. After Suya confirmed that he was, the owner mentioned that Suya was a customer. The giant remarked that a crossbow would not be sufficient to kill monsters, not even the smaller ones. He added that it was also quite expensive. He explained that bows were troublesome to use in a dungeon because they could endanger allies if handled carelessly, though they did stand out. He displayed another bow, saying that it was excellent for showing off since no one remembered boring adventurers. He further mentioned that elven bows were of exceptional quality and could not be broken even by beastmen. According to him, even the Jaime were capable of pulling their strings. Suya asked Ofe whether he was an adventurer as well. Ofe replied that he served as a protector for the master of the shop. After giving it some thought, Suya decided to purchase the bow, along with some cheap arrows to accompany it. Ofe warned him that the cheap arrows were of poor quality and advised him to buy heavy arrows instead, explaining that they could be reused. He added that Kui arrows were particularly reliable. Convinced by the advice, Suya chose to purchase the better quality arrows. The owner then informed Suya that Ofa was not the shopkeeper. In response, Suya dismissed the remark and told the owner that it did not matter, asking him to calculate the total cost. He requested 20 arrows, 20 arrowheads, and 20 arrow shafts. He also mentioned that he would carry the bow on his shoulder and asked the owner to wrap the arrows properly so they could be placed in a quiver. The owner revealed that the quiver would cost extra. Suya thanked him nonetheless. Before leaving, Suya placed a gold coin in Ofi's hand and said that he was looking for someone who could teach him how to use a bow properly. He asked whether Ofe knew anyone suitable. Afterward, he left the shop, recalling that Ofe had mentioned knowing someone skilled in archery. Mashina approached Suya and asked whether he needed help with navigation. Suya declined, saying that he merely wished to take a walk around. As he walked through the streets, several people glanced in his direction. Suya reflected on the issue of troublesome adventurers and concluded that he should not rely too heavily on AI. Instead, he resolved to train both his mind and body, believing that in the end, the only things he could truly depend on were his own intellect and strength. He remembered hearing that a certain person wandered near the outer wall around noon. However, the area surrounding the outer wall was vast, and he considered asking someone for directions. At that moment, he overheard a woman scolding someone named Barfel, telling him that he had fallen asleep near the washing area again and that his fur had stuck to all the laundry. She instructed him not to repeat such behavior. As Suya approached, he was startled to see what appeared to be a giant beast. He was unsure whether it was a dog or a wolf, though it possessed a distinct aura. The woman told Barfel that if he simply wanted to sleep, he should lie down on the floor instead. Barfel apologized. Suya excused himself and politely asked the woman which god Barfel served, wondering if he was a wolfman. Barfel suddenly rushed toward Suya and declared that Suya did not recognize him, claiming that he was the great hero of the north. Upon closer inspection, Barfel observed that Suya appeared to be a foreigner and questioned his origins. As Barfel spoke, Suya noticed that his breath smelled strongly of alcohol. Suddenly, a cat girl arrived and shouted at Barfel, demanding to know if he had been hiding there. She insisted that he pay his tab. Barfel addressed her dismissively as Tutu and asked whether she was truly demanding payment. She confirmed that she was and revealed that she had already confiscated his weapons. Totem carried carried a large bag and kicked it, stating that the old bone equipment would not even sell for a single copper coin. Barfell laughed and remarked that it was true, adding that those men were unable to handle Logan armor and that sly merchants could never understand its true value. Suya turned to Barfell and wondered whether he was an adventurer. Barfell confirmed that he was the hunter of vampires in the righteous continent's capital, Death and Barfell, and that he was none other than that very person. Tutu then arrived and explained that Barfell was currently under house arrest because a foolish adventurer had mistaken him for a monster and attacked him. Since the man had been difficult to reason with, Barfell had struck him back. As a result, the adventurer had been knocked unconscious, which had greatly angered the head of the association. It had been 50 years since Barfell had been scolded so harshly, and he had nearly been moved to tears. Suya was astonished to realize that the great hero of the North was under house arrest, that he got drunk, had unpaid tabs, and was just as miserable as the god of the Suya. Suya then mentioned that he had almost forgotten something. He showed them a coin and asked whether they were familiar with the area, explaining that he wanted to ask them a few questions. After finishing his discussion, Suya walked into the narrow streets where he saw a few girls running and playing nearby, along with a man lying on the ground. He continued forward and soon found two elf girls sitting together. As he excused himself, one of the girls immediately went on guard, raising her bow and arrow, and called him the half-dead Himu from before. The second girl told her to calm down, saying that they had finally met again. Suya thanked them, saying that he had not lost his arm thanks to them. He first expressed his gratitude by offering a pouch of money. However, the girl who had been holding some items in her hands told him that it was unnecessary, explaining that she simply could not abandon someone as badly wounded as he had been. She insisted that her actions had merely been a good deed and that he should not feel obligated. Suya replied that if they put it that way, he should at least introduce himself properly. He revealed that he was Suya, an outsider and an adventurer. The girl behind then introduced herself as Lawa Luna Lahuris, stating that she too was an adventurer. She added that the girl with the bow and arrow was her younger sister, Air. Lawa Luna asked Air to greet Suya, but Air appeared shocked. Lawa Luna warned her that she would be angry if she refused. Air then introduced herself but warned Suya that if he dared to say her name lightly, she would shoot an arrow between his eyes. Suya explained that he would get straight to the point. He said that he was looking for someone proficient in archery and that he had not expected the younger sister to be the expert. He asked that if they were not busy, they might consider giving him some guidance and instruction. He added that he was willing to pay for their help. Air immediately refused, stating that she neither wanted to teach nor intended to instruct a human like him in archery. She then looked at the bow he carried and questioned whether it was an elven bow, asking from whose corpse he had taken it. She accused him of stealing the bow and sarcastically asked whether he now intended to steal their expertise as well. Suddenly, Lawa Luna told her to stop, but Air shouted that Suya was a human and that humans were terrible people. In the middle of her outburst, she suddenly collapsed. Suya rushed forward to catch her as she fell, and Lawa Luna looked visibly worried for her sister. Lawa Luna apologized, but Suya told her to leave everything to him, explaining that he had seen similar cases before. As he gently lowered Air's head, he observed that she did not smell of alcohol, so it was not a hangover. He suspected that it might instead be an infectious disease. While questioning Lawa Luna about Air's condition, Lawa Luna explained that Air did not suffer from any illness. She revealed that the inn owner had misunderstood the situation and turned them away because of it. Air had previously been shot, and the wound from that injury had become the source of her current condition. Suya admitted that his camp was a bit far away, but suggested that they go there, saying that although it was not an ideal place, it was certainly better than the windswept area they were currently in. He added that if they found it difficult to trust him, he would give them all his money and they could run away with it, as it was his entire fortune. However, Lawa Luna refused the offer, stating that the amount was far too little to serve as her sister's ransom, or even her own life. Suya clarified that he was not offering it as ransom, but rather as a token of good faith in exchange for their trust. When he called Lawa Luna by her name, she did not respond at first, and Suya wondered whether she had given up on trusting him. After a moment, she calmed down and told him that he should call her Lana instead. They then went to Suya's camp. Upon arriving, Suya asked them to wait while he set up a new tent. As he was doing so, Isola appeared and welcomed him, stating that she would perform an excrement examination and asking him to lend her his poncho. After arranging the campsite, Air was laid down on a bed. Isola then teleported back and instructed Suya to administer an antibiotic pill. Suya was aware that although the communication systems were still malfunctioning, he had divided some of Isola's functions into a portable device, allowing both systems to operate autonomously. He then addressed the bots, clarifying that they were not moving on their own against their programming. Isola responded that they had not moved intentionally, but had merely lost their balance, and that Suya had coincidentally been standing where they rolled. Suya stated that he would examine the internal systems later. For now, he turned to Machina and asked about the status of the restoration of her medical program. Machina replied that it was currently at 15% completion and estimated that it would take 3 months to fully restore. In the meantime, she strongly advised Suya to refrain from damaging his own internal organs. Suya wondered whether Machina could perform abdominal surgery in her current state. Machina replied that it would be difficult. Although they had sufficient medical supplies, the chances of success were low given the current capabilities of either herself or Isola. Suya decided to put the matter on hold for the time being and said they should prepare lunch instead since they had a guest waiting. He then served food to Lawaluna. She tasted it and found it delicious, asking what it was. Suya explained that it was arajiru, a soup made by boiling fish and vegetables in miso. Lawaluna admitted that she did not know what either of those were. Suya suddenly felt embarrassed and thought that he should have served her something more exquisite. He briefly considered misova, something that smelled like fish, but dismissed the thought. At that moment, air came out. Lawaluna asked whether she was feeling better. Suya offered air some food as well, explaining that although it was not fancy, he had prepared soup. However, air coldly replied that she did not need something that reeked of fish, and that she would choose what to eat herself. Lawaluna scolded Air for being rude, but Suya said it was not a problem. He told Air that there was a provision container at the back and invited her to pick whatever she preferred. Air chose a dark cup labeled instant food. Suya informed her that it was cup ramen and asked whether she was sure she was fine with that. She replied that it was exactly what she wanted to eat. Suya accepted her choice. Soon, Miss Ronica arrived, remarking that they had guests. She clung to Suya's shoulder, and Suya explained that he had asked Air to teach him archery. Miss Ronica introduced herself as the one who had formed a contract with Suya and said she was pleased to welcome the two lovely elves. Lawaluna then introduced herself and Air. Miss Ronica continued by explaining that the land they were on had been borrowed from the fisherman by her follower, and that they could rest there peacefully, free from the troubles and complications of city life. She then asked Suya to come with her and bring Machina as well. Suya agreed, but before leaving, he told Air to continue eating and warned her not to burn her tongue. When Air tasted the ramen, she found that it was surprisingly good. Meanwhile, Miss Ronica explained that the elves sometimes used the term impure, calling it a cruel custom. She clarified that the word was used to describe illegitimate children or those of mixed blood. She revealed that Lawaluna was considered impure and warned Suya to be wary of her, saying that Lawaluna's abilities exceeded his own. Isola added that, according to the collected information, the elves were currently at war with the kingdom of Lemuria, primarily due to a land dispute. She further stated that the eldest prince of Lemuria, who had gone as a mediator, had already been killed. Isola cautioned Suya that although the elves might not appear so, they were considered barbarians, and he should be careful when associating with them. As Isola continued speaking, Air suddenly approached Suya and asked whether he still wanted her to teach him how to shoot arrows. Suya asked whether she had changed her mind. She replied that she had agreed because the ramen was very good. She then stated her conditions. She required clothing, lodging, food, and 5 silver coins as payment. Suya agreed to her terms. After receiving his agreement, Air said that she would inform her sister and that they would begin immediately. She told Suya to prepare himself. Isola called out to Suya, and he mentioned that Isola had also heard that Air would be teaching him archery. Miss Ronica once again perched on his shoulder and said that she did not mind. However, she told him to behave properly and not forget her earlier warning, reminding him that he was very precious to her, far more than the foolish elves would ever be. After some time, they set up 3 targets at a distance. Standing a few steps away, Air explained that since Suya had said he wanted to learn quickly, she would teach him the simplest form, the one commonly used by hunters. She then asked whether he knew how it differed from the soldier's form. When Suya admitted that he did not, she demonstrated by shooting an arrow. She explained that in the soldier's form, the bow was held vertically with the arrow knocked on the right side. In contrast, the hunter's form required holding the bow horizontally or slightly angled, with the arrow knocked on the left side. She then fired 2 arrows into the center of the target to demonstrate the difference. Suya observed that with the soldier's form, arrows could be knocked and released quickly, but aiming was more difficult. With the hunter's form, knocking took slightly longer, yet aiming was much easier. Air remarked that if Suya could understand that much already, he likely had some natural talent. She then instructed him to face the target and extend his bow arm forward while keeping the bow straight and horizontal. As she continued giving instructions, Suya followed carefully. She told him to grip the arrow using his thumb, index, and middle fingers while keeping them clear of the feathers. He was to place the arrow on top of the bow, knock it to the string, and pull it back until his right hand touched his cheek. She instructed him not to release immediately, but to hold the posture and commit it to memory. Suya struggled to maintain the stance. Air commented that he looked like a stone statue until the moment he would shoot. Finally, she gave the command and told him to release the arrow. To both their surprise, the arrow struck the center of the target. Suya was astonished. Air praised him, saying that her own archery teacher used to say that those who missed their first shot would also miss their last. Since Suya had hit his first, it seemed likely he would hit his last as well. She then declared that since it was his first day, they would start with 10 shots. If Suya could hit the target 10 times within 30 seconds, he was to call her. She added that she would rest until he accomplished that. Suya agreed and continued practicing. After a while, Isola approached and asked whether she could trouble him for a moment. Suya wondered if this was a continuation of their earlier discussion. Isola confirmed and asked why he had not informed her that he intended to use a bow. Suya questioned whether Isola knew how to shoot. Isola replied that she possessed the complete recorded history of human warfare. Suya wondered whether those records had not been damaged. Isola replied that they had been successfully decoded. She added that Isola and Machina all strived to be useful to him and therefore he should place his trust in them. From now on, she advised, he ought to consult her regarding combat matters before taking action. She further informed him that she would continue reporting the progress of the program recoveries. Of the 3 prioritized programs, manufacturing had reached 20% completion. Medicine stood at 15% and cooking had progressed to 27%. However, she believed Suya could maintain a balanced diet using his current cooking skills. Suya admitted that he had already reached his limits and did not know any additional recipes. Isola responded that his current calorie and nutrient intake from the available ingredients was already sufficient, and that excessive resources were being invested in the cooking program. Suya insisted that food was extremely important. Isola remarked that such thinking was a very Japanese trait. At that moment, Machina spoke through the system. She stated that using her control privileges, she had temporarily deactivated Isola and asked Suya to forgive them, explaining that she tended to be meticulous. She informed him that the excrement examination had been completed and that she would now present the results. Machina reported that no foreign pathogens had been detected in Suya's sample. However, she had discovered an abnormality in Air's blood sample. Suya wondered whether a bullet was still lodged inside Air's body. Machina confirmed that this was the case and warned that it would threaten Air's life if not removed soon. She suggested that if Suya successfully treated her, both Lawaluna and Air might join his party. Suya questioned whether Machina was proposing that they attempt surgery using the incomplete medical program. He reflected that risking someone's life with a potentially faulty prosthesis from another world sounded like a terrible idea. He did not want to be hated if the attempt failed. Machina responded that his hesitation was a wise decision and Isola shared the same opinion. As Suya continued shooting arrows at the target, he reflected that their opinion seemed cold-blooded, but the chances of success were slim. All he currently possessed was a barely functional artificial intelligence and limited resources. Therefore, he had to make careful choices. Helping others was a luxury he could not afford, and he had no obligation to do so. He reminded himself that he had come to this world for the sake of his sister. He resolved not to let unnecessary thoughts distract him. Clearing his mind, he focused solely on drawing the bow and releasing each arrow. Suya was exhausted, and while he was lying down, a rabbit came and clung to him. He suddenly woke up, wondering if he had fallen asleep. He found the rabbit extremely cute and decided to keep it, naming it Yukihiko because it was as white as snow. After that, he thought about returning to the camp. He happily remarked that the camp would become Yukihiko's new home. All of a sudden, an arrow was shot and struck Yukihiko in the head, killing it instantly. Suya was shocked and screamed in horror. It turned out to be Air who had shot the arrow. Afterward, they decided to cook the rabbit to eat it. Suya then asked Air to wake her sister. However, Air revealed that her sister had gone to town early in the morning. Suya was surprised, and Air continued by explaining that Lawaluna had received an invitation to join a party. That was why she had gone to the association to submit her application, as she needed to prepare several things beforehand. Air added that she did not think Lawaluna was planning to enter the dungeon. Suya thought that since he did not have a refrigerator, there was no way to preserve the meat in such a temperature. He mentioned that he had only wanted Lawaluna to try the roasted meat skewer. Air then asked why Suya did not simply go and bring Lawaluna back himself, adding that she would tutor him once he returned. Suya wondered why Air did not go instead. Air replied that she was not feeling well. After that, she asked whether she could eat more of that ramen dish. Suya responded that what he was cooking was far more delicious. When she made an annoyed face, Suya told her that she could eat all of it if she wanted. After that, Asen shifted to the entrance of the dungeon, where Lawaluna noticed that Suya had also arrived. She wondered why he was there. Suya replied that Air had told him Lawaluna was at the association to submit her application to enter the dungeon. Lawaluna wondered if he had come there just for her. Suya responded that it was something like that. He then glanced at a few people standing behind her and wondered if they were her party members. Lawaluna confirmed that they were. She explained that they had called out to her in town the previous day, and since it was urgent business, they were submitting the application that day and planned to depart very early the next morning. Suya understood and thought that he should prepare a lunchbox for Lawaluna. Lawaluna apologized for leaving the camp without informing him and mentioned that she had seen him training until very late the previous night. That was why she had thought she should not wake him. Suya also apologized, saying that since he had woken up late, he had not been able to prepare breakfast for her. He added that, for future reference, he wanted to know her favorite food. At that moment, Lawaluna's stomach growled. Suya suggested that they should go to the nearest place and eat something. She agreed, and the two of them went to have a meal. While eating, Lawaluna remarked that compared to the food they were having, the soup Suya had made earlier was much more delicious. She wondered if he was a cook. Suya denied it. She then suggested that it must mean he came from a place where the food tasted exceptionally good and was remarkable. Suya wondered about elven food. Lawaluna explained that elves mainly ate plain fruits, berries, nuts, and wildflowers. She added that they also had some fermented food and alcohol, which tasted very good. Suya understood that such organic food was healthy for the body, but lacked strong flavor. Lawaluna further revealed that her sister Air preferred very salty food. Suya then wondered how Air reacted to traditional elven cuisine. Lawaluna replied that Air had been trained by a beastman mentor who had greatly influenced her. That was why she did not seem very much like an elf, even in her diet. Suya then wondered if there was any way to deal with the problem of bitterness in such food. Suddenly, they heard a man sitting nearby begin singing a song accompanied by pleasant music. Suya listened to the entire song, which reminded him of something. Suddenly, he asked Lawaluna whether Hyurs was part of her name. When she confirmed it, Suya remarked that it meant she was a hero. At that moment, a knight suddenly kicked over their table. Both of them were confused. The man mockingly asked whether they wanted to hear the rest of the story. He continued by saying that the descendants of Hyurs, the so-called heroes, had been foolish enough to pick a fight with humans and had ultimately perished. He further claimed that the elven princesses had been even more foolish, as when they realized they were losing the war, they had sacrificed their own citizens and buried half of the forest. He then glared at Lawaluna angrily and remarked that it was quite a coincidence that an elven princess was sitting there with them in such a shabby establishment. He sarcastically wondered what she was doing there. Suya grew furious and demanded to know why the man had wasted their food. The man turned to Suya and questioned who he was. Suya sarcastically referred to him as a retired man and asked who he thought he was. The man sneered that Suya looked like a fool and that he was in their country without even knowing who stood before him. Suya replied that he still did not know and added that if the man was truly so important, he should write his name on his face. A girl from the man's group of social heard this and laughed. Enraged, the man introduced himself as George of Lemuria, the prince of the kingdom of Lemuria. Suya responded that he could not believe that such behavior, acting like a thug, kicking tables, causing trouble, and disturbing a young lady's meal, was part of a prince's daily duties. George became furious, and Suya prepared himself for a confrontation. However, Lawaluna intervened and requested that Suya allow her to handle the situation. Suya insisted that he would at least speak his mind, but Lawaluna urged him to leave, explaining that it was a matter between royalty and that a mere adventurer like him had no right to interfere. Suya reluctantly agreed to wait outside. As he stepped out, Machina contacted him and informed him that she had deployed a bugged drone inside the shop. She asked whether she should transmit the visuals to him. Suya agreed and asked what she expected him to do with that information. Machina replied that she was merely offering advice, reminding him that the only one who could restrain him was himself. Suya acknowledged this and asked her to show him the footage. Upon seeing the live visuals, Suya was shocked to find Lawaluna kneeling before George, asking him to forgive her companion's rude remarks. George declared that it was the elves who had killed his brother, and that he had become the prince because of that. He coldly warned her to behave properly next time. Lawaluna agreed and once again asked for forgiveness. George then remarked that his shoes were dirty and ordered her to wipe them. When she took out a cloth, he stopped her and cruelly commanded her to use her mouth instead, telling her not to act as if she were human. She reluctantly agreed and was about to comply. At that very moment, Suya ordered Machina to activate the self-destruction protocol and detonate all the drones inside. Suddenly, explosions erupted, drawing everyone's attention. In the chaos, Suya rushed in and delivered a powerful kick to George, shocking everyone present. Suya was struck in return and fell to the ground, but he told Lawaluna that it was merely a secret skill taught to him by his younger sister. Lawaluna shouted, asking whether he even understood what he had just done. Suya calmly replied that he had merely picked a fight with another adventurer. George then ordered one of his comrades, Lanciel, to cut off Suya's head. Lanciel hesitated, prompting George to shout at him and demand that he kill Suya immediately. Suya mocked George, asking whether the prince was incapable of fighting on his own and whether he needed to hide behind women for protection. He even taunted him by asking if he had lost his courage in the war. George was enraged and prepared to attack, but Lanciel intervened. He stated that years of harassment might be tolerated, but if adventurers began pointing their blades at one another, it would tarnish the king's name. Suya then realized that Lawaluna was also an adventurer and wondered what they should do next. George eventually sheathed his sword and declared that using it against someone like Suya would be unnecessary. He arrogantly stated that for a mere insect like him, his fists would be more than enough. George moved forward and punched Suya. Although Suya had prepared himself, he was beaten severely. When he was brought back to the camp, Ms. Ronica and Air were shocked at his condition. Lawaluna angrily shouted that if they were only going to stand there and act as a nuisance instead of helping treat his injuries, they should leave at once. Suya realized that he had completely forgotten something important. In that world, he was considered very weak. He might have stood a chance against an ordinary man, but he was no match for an adventurer. He further understood that if the old man had not intervened and stopped the fight, he would have been in serious trouble. Even now, he felt it was too early to feel relieved as the situation was far from safe. Isola handed a cold compress to Lawaluna and suggested that they should first try to cool Suya's injuries. Lawaluna understood that her healing magic was flame-based. While it was effective for treating lacerations, as it used heat to seal wounds, it was not suitable for injuries like Suya's. Moreover, Suya's natural recovery ability was lower than that of most people, which left her unsure of what to do. Suddenly, Lawaluna remembered something and came up with an idea. She asked Air to lend her the wrist brace, explaining that she intended to convert the magic stored within it to enhance Suya's recovery ability. Air was shocked and protested that the brace belonged to Lord Hyurs and that lending such a treasured artifact to a human felt inappropriate. Lawaluna immediately shouted at her to hand it over. With no other choice, Air reluctantly gave the wrist brace to Lawaluna. Lawaluna took a deep breath and began offering her prayer to their god, Azus. She asked him to relay her message to Meritome, the god of torrents, and to summon the winds to gather around Suya, to let them dance and disperse around him, granting her the grace to channel the gale and drive away the evil. She then prayed to Aromia, the god of harmony, asking that magic emerge and converge within Suya. As she began the healing process, Isola remarked in amazement that nearly 80% of Suya's injuries had already disappeared and that he was beginning to open his eyes. Lawaluna then stated that the next stage of treatment might be somewhat painful for him. After that, she started chanting to the sacred flames that bless all beings with light, heat, and even pain, using them to heal Suya. While chanting, she placed her hand over Suya's mouth. Suddenly, Suya screamed loudly, overwhelmed by the intense pain. Lawaluna urged him to endure it for a little while longer. Suya felt as though her hand was burning hot, as if he were being scorched alive. The pain persisted for some time before gradually subsiding. Afterward, Isola observed that the damage to Suya's head had been reduced to only 5% and commented that it was truly an astonishing medical procedure. Lawaluna replied that she was relieved to hear that. When asked why she had gone so far for him, she explained that what had happened to her that day, along with her experiences with Suya, had helped her understand what kind of person he truly was. Miss Ronica then approached and asked whether they had finished treating Suya's wounds. Isola confirmed that they had, though she mentioned that there were still minor contusions on his abdomen that would take approximately 3 days to fully heal. Miss Ronica then turned to Lawaluna and remarked that she seemed to belong to the bloodline of Hyurs. When Lawaluna acknowledged it, Miss Ronica added that this explained why elven royalty was pretending to be an adventurer. Lawaluna revealed that after the elves had lost the war, her father had presented her and her injured sister to the king of Lemuria. To put it bluntly, they had been given as hostages. She explained that from the perspective of the Suyalanders, there was no reason for the king to keep an ugly daughter who had burned the forest and whose people would never accept her. Lawaluna continued by saying that the king of Lemuria had turned out to be far kinder than she had expected. She had prepared herself for imprisonment or something even worse. She admitted that despite considering herself ugly, she had steeled herself to endure any humiliation, even if she had been forced into something degrading. However, instead of punishing them, the king had granted them freedom on the condition that the two sisters work as adventurers. Yet becoming adventurers proved far more difficult than they had anticipated. Lawaluna explained that people like them could not easily find a place where they truly belonged in that country. They were often swindled by other adventurers, shopkeepers, and even innkeepers. Many nights, they had no choice but to huddle together in dark street corners to sleep. Ms. Ronica then remarked that Suya had asked extremely painful questions. She requested that Lawaluna forgive her follower, suggesting that since he had been half dead earlier, they should assume he was not thinking clearly. Lawaluna replied that she would not allow such a situation to happen again. She declared that next time, she would simply knock George down and settle the matter herself. Suya immediately told her not to do that, promising that he would handle things better next time. Lawaluna questioned whether he still had not realized that she had been angry at him. She reminded him that at that time, she had only wanted him to leave the matter alone, and he had clearly understood that. Suya admitted that he had understood, but when he had peeked inside and seen her lips nearly touching George's shoes, he felt that no man could stand by and allow a beautiful woman to be humiliated by someone like that. Lawaluna blushed when she heard him call her beautiful and told him to stop making such jokes. Suya replied that he did not know how elven beauty standards worked, but in his eyes, she was genuinely very cute. He added that although he had not been in that world for long, he believed he had seen his fair share of maidens. He encouraged her to be more confident in her appearance insisting that she was both pretty and adorable. Lawaluna blushed even more and quickly ran away from the scene. Suya stood there in confusion until Air remarked that he was acting like a man-whore. Suya defended himself by stating that he was simply a man speaking honest facts. Afterward, he asked Makina whether he could leave the cooking to her, as he was too exhausted to move. Makina agreed and teasingly remarked that Suya was quite the smooth operator. Just then, Miss Ronica reminded everyone that she was a cutter and that they should not forgive what had happened so easily. Hearing that, Suya grew irritated and wondered what exactly was wrong with Miss Ronica. Finally, it was Suya's 10th day in the other world. He packed an obento for Lawaluna because she was leaving for dungeon exploration. She wondered what it was. Suya explained that it was a packed meal she could eat inside the dungeon. He told her that it contained bacon baked inside wheat dough mixed with curry powder, vegetables, and egg. She asked if he had made it himself. Suya replied that he had. He added that it probably did not taste very good, but it should be enough to fill her stomach, and he promised that he would do better next time. He then asked her to make sure to eat it. She thanked him and took the meal. Suya also told her that he would walk her to the entrance, but she refused, saying that she did not want to repeat what had happened the previous day. She asked him to take good care of his body. Suya thought that it was precisely because of what had happened the day before that he wanted to accompany her. In the end, he simply asked her to stay safe. Air also wished Lawaluna good luck. After Lawaluna left, Suya said that it was time to catch up on his missed training. When he turned to speak to Air about training after breakfast, he noticed that she was already on her knees due to her illness and was asking to be taken to the camp. Suya lifted her and laid her on the bed. She told him that if he were to attack her at that moment, she would not be able to resist. Suya wondered what she was even saying. Air then asked whether he had not felt her charm, adding that she was confident in her looks. Suya admitted that she was beautiful. While changing the cloth on her head, he told her that she was very beautiful and said that they should get married once she recovered. However, she turned her face away and said that she truly hated humans. She then asked him whether he liked Lawaluna. Suya was shocked and replied that it was not like that. He said that he had not thought about it in that way, though he did think Lawaluna was sweet and lovely. Air commented that Suya seemed like a very creepy person and told him to forget what she had said. Suya responded that he was going to practice with the bow and told her to call him when she became hungry, as he would prepare something for her. He continued practicing archery, but suddenly the bowstring snapped. Suya knew it had happened because he had used it too much. Since it was made of hemp thread and he did not have any spare in storage, he had no choice but to take a break. Although he felt it was a bit troublesome, he decided to prepare lunch first and fix the bowstring afterward. As he turned to leave, he was suddenly stabbed from behind, and the impact made him fall to the ground. Suya was utterly confused. Looking toward the shadows, he heard a voice saying that it had a request. Suya wondered who it was. The voice replied that it was the nameless ghost residing inside the bracelet and asked him not to worry about its identity. It explained that danger was approaching one of its kin and that it needed Suya to lend him his power. Suya responded that it seemed he was already too deeply involved to refuse. He said he did not mind helping, but he questioned what exactly he could do. From the shadows, a female creature emerged, speaking about the nameless hero and Suya's devotion. She described him as a feeble man with a stalwart soul who had established a contract. Suya was confused and wondered what contract she was referring to. The ghost then clarified that it would be borrowing Suya's body for a while. Immediately after saying so, it entered him. Without wasting time, Suya rushed to Makina and told her that he was going into the dungeon. He learned from her that Isola was also inside. Suya was shocked, and Makina explained that Isola had just been emitted as light from Lawaluna's lantern and was now accompanying her. Suya wondered what Isola was doing there, but realized that the situation might be convenient. He asked Makina whether they could establish a transmission link. She replied that she would try and that it might be possible, though only for a very short time. She began syncing the monitoring system with Isola's camera. When the footage came through, Suya looked at it and was shocked to see Prince George and his party, with Lawaluna following behind them. He asked if Isola could hear him. Makina responded that the connection was unstable and that they were unable to receive audio. Suya then asked which level they were on. Makina replied that she had just received map data from Isola and confirmed that they were on the 10th floor. Suya immediately thought about heading there, but then remembered that he had not yet repaired his bowstring. However, he realized he had another bow and that it was only a matter of finding the right arrows for it. At that moment, Ghettobato arrived and showed Suya something on the net. He told him to look at the huge fish they had hunted the previous night. Ghettobato explained that he had caught it with his clan brothers and wanted to share some with Suya. Suya gladly accepted, but mentioned that he needed something else from Ghettobato. Ghettobato asked what it was. Suya inquired about the harpoons hanging on Ghettabato's back and asked if he would sell them to him, as well as take him quickly to town. Ghettobato observed that Suya seemed to be in urgent need and decided to give him the harpoons for free. As for the trip, he asked whether Suya was comfortable traveling by river. The scene shifted to Ghettobato and Tutu, who were sitting together. Tutu remarked that Ghettobato was drinking too much again and warned him not to say that he was putting it on his tab once more. Ghettobato asked her not to be like that and swore that he would pay everything off after his next expedition. While they were talking, they suddenly noticed a small explosion in the water behind them. Tutu went to check and discovered that it was Ghettobato and Suya. Makina informed Suya that they had reached town in just 330 seconds, adding that it was faster than any current generation submarine. Suya felt as though he might actually die from the intense speed. Ghettobato wondered aloud whether it should have been faster, but explained that he was getting old and had also been carrying Suya with him. He warned Suya to be careful with the harpoons, explaining that they were coated with a paralyzing poison meant for large fish. He added that even a small scratch would leave a human like Suya unable to move for half a day. Suya replied that it was very useful information to know. Ghettobato looked at Suya and commented that his friends were certainly interesting fellows. Suya then approached them and said that he had a favor to ask, explaining that he would like to rent their equipment. They were shocked when Suya showed them several gold coins. Ghettobato told him to wait and praised him for having good taste in choosing a fine bow. However, he explained that Laquan bows were not drawn with physical arm strength but with magical power, and that someone like Suya would not be able to use one. To his surprise, Suya easily lifted the bow and remarked that it was indeed a fine weapon. He said that he would borrow it and advised Ghettobato not to drink so much. Ghettobato simply told him to hold on for a moment. Ghettobato informed Suya that he would be waiting at the campground and asked him to explain everything once he returned. Suya agreed and left, silently hoping that Lawaluna would be safe. A party was waiting at the entrance. Among them, a young magician girl stretched her arms and complained that it had been an exhausting workday and that she was extremely hungry. She suggested to the leader that they should go for lunch, adding that she felt like eating some expensive meat. At that moment, Suya came running at full speed and accidentally bumped into someone. The person fell to the ground and immediately began shouting at him. However, before the man could continue, Suya had already drawn his bow and aimed an arrow at him. The magician girl demanded to know what Suya was suddenly doing to their leader. Suya stated that their party seemed to be missing one member and asked whether they cared to explain why. He demanded that if they valued their lives, they should immediately tell him what had happened. The leader was visibly frightened as Suya appeared unhinged and dangerously serious. Soon after, the guildmaster and Avetta arrived only to discover that it was Suya causing the commotion again. Guildmaster Solskjaer wondered what Suya was doing this time and questioned who he even was at the moment. The leader hurriedly explained that Suya had suddenly pointed a bow at him and was demanding answers. Solskjaer clarified that she was not speaking to the leader but to the foreigner and the woman accompanying him. Suya then asked whether they had taken Lawaluna into their party and demanded that they explain what had happened to her immediately. The group denied knowing anyone by that name and insisted that they had not formed a party with such a person. Suya then called out to Solskjaer, who responded that she would check the records. Using her ability, she examined the registered parties and discovered that the group in question had come from the Hyur's forest. However, she found no proper records of them in the guild system. The leader quickly agreed with her findings and demanded that someone get Suya away from him. Suddenly, Solskjaer noticed something even more alarming. They did not possess any official application documents. Avetta then stepped forward and mentioned that she had seen them emerge from the portal earlier. She suggested summoning the official in charge of portal registrations to confirm their identities. The rest of the people present began to murmur, confused and uneasy, wondering what all of this meant and what was truly happening. Poe stepped forward and declared that he would tell everyone the truth, that their leader, Melter, had accepted money from Prince George and sold out Lawaluna. He further revealed that the official documents had been stolen by a beastman who was a friend of the prince and also the person responsible for handling those papers. Melter grew furious and demanded to know whether Poe understood how badly this would ruin him. Poe replied that he did not care. He stated that Melter had already betrayed his own kin and could no longer be trusted. He added that if Melter was capable of selling out Lawaluna, then he might just as easily sell Poe next time. Therefore, he announced that he was leaving the party. The magician girl also declared that she was leaving and walked away alongside Poe. Suya then asked Solskjaer to detain Melter, as he intended to go and rescue Lawaluna. Solskjaer questioned whether Suya even knew where Lawaluna was. Suya revealed that she was currently on the 10th floor of the dungeon. Solskjaer pointed out that he had never ventured beyond the 5th floor before. Despite that, Solskjaer stated that she would arrange for the emergency rescue portal to be opened for him, allowing him to travel directly to the 10th floor. She instructed Avetta to bring the old man in charge as quickly as possible. After Avetta hurried off, Solskjaer assured Suya that she personally sympathized with the princess, which was why she was offering her assistance. However, she warned him that if he judged the situation to be impossible, he should immediately retreat and forget everything. She reminded him that although the king might appear kind, he was still the father of Prince George. She also clarified that there would be no official record of the guild taking anyone's side, as adventurers were free to act as they wished. Therefore, Suya would bear full responsibility for his actions. When the portal opened before them, Suya declared that if he caught Prince George, he would kill him without hesitation. Solskjaer questioned whether he truly understood what that meant. She added that George would be accompanied by powerful guards and expressed her hope that Suya would not throw his life away in a foolish death. She then asked him to wait and began chanting, invoking a tiny miracle born from the aftermath of the Holy Damast's madness. She acknowledged that a powerful soul now resided within Suya's body and hoped that it could hear her words. She spoke the name Lumidia, the unknown one, the fool who had once slain a giant spider yet allowed the dragon eater to escape, and thanked that presence for its assistance. Moments later, Suya was teleported to the 10th floor. Upon arrival, he attempted to contact Isola. Isola expressed confusion about how Suya had managed to reach that level so quickly. Suya demanded to know Lawaluna's current position. Isola replied that he would display the map data and mark her location on Suya's glasses. Isola then apologized, explaining that when he had called out to Lawaluna in an attempt to help her escape, she had been startled, which had resulted in him being thrown aside. Suya ordered Isola to come and meet him. Isola agreed and stated that he would wait at the rendezvous point. Suya moved forward without hesitation. After some time, he encountered a catwoman who appeared startled upon seeing him. She claimed that they were busy with something and suggested that he turn back and go elsewhere. Then she recognized him as the man from the tavern earlier. Suya heard a noise from deeper within the area. The catwoman wondered aloud whether it was Mayani. At that moment, Suya's anger reached its limit, and he struck her. Isola soon arrived, and Suya expressed his appreciation for the assistance. Isola replied that he was happy to be of help. Suya remarked that the area felt unusually quiet. Isola explained that the knights guarding Prince George had already eradicated all the nearby monsters. Suya immediately understood that this meant attacking them head-on would be a foolish move. Seeing that Suya had grasped the situation, Isola then offered him a suggestion. The scene shifted to Lawaluna, who was being held captive by George and struggling desperately to free herself, but she was unsuccessful. George remarked that it was the first time a girl had resisted him so strongly, and added that a lowly woman like her was about to receive affection from the king, so there was nothing for her to hate about it. Lawaluna wondered whether such behavior was truly appropriate for a king's son. George replied that adventurers were free people and that, as a king's son, he should at least have the freedom to choose his own woman. He further stated that he wanted to see how far a woman who had burned her own people could fall, and he even told her to give up. In response, Lawaluna kicked him in an attempt to free herself, but he seized her with all his might and called out to Lanciel for help. However, Lanciel refused, explaining that he did not know whether something was lurking in the shadows, nor did he understand why such trouble needed to be caused in that place. The magician girl stepped forward and asked George to allow her to practice her skills. She claimed that she would turn Lawaluna into a degraded woman who would lust after George as if she were in heat, leaving her mind hollow for a time. She complained that she had not yet been able to use her powers properly. However, as Lawaluna pleaded for them to stop, a sudden blow struck the magician and killed her instantly. George and Lanciel were left confused, wondering what had just happened. Suddenly, Lanciel went on guard and told George to get down. He deflected another incoming attack and demanded that the attacker reveal himself. Suya then appeared and questioned whether they were not the true cowards for ganging up on a single person. He added that if they wished to call him a coward, he had no problem crushing their heads. Lanciel recognized Suya as the man from the tavern earlier. George, shocked, insisted that it was impossible for a weakling like him to accomplish something like that. Suya responded that if Lanciel could block all of his arrows, he would disappear quietly into the darkness. Otherwise, George would certainly die. Lanciel prepared himself as Suya fired an arrow, which Lanciel successfully blocked. Suya continued shooting, and Lanciel managed to deflect every arrow. Suddenly, Lanciel closed the distance and held Suya at sword point, declaring it to be Suya's defeat. Although he admitted that Suya's archery skills were impressive and that he had even managed to destroy his shield, he decided to retreat, stating that he was not someone who should side with the elves. Suya replied that it was not over yet. At that moment, an arrow shot from behind and struck Lanciel. Another arrow followed, hitting the girl and knocking her down. It was then revealed that the earlier Suya had only been an illusion and the real Suya had attacked from behind. Suya noticed that the girl was begging him to do whatever he pleased with her but to spare the prince. He kicked her aside and approached George, who was unable to move because he had already been struck by a paralyzing arrow. Suya revealed that the arrow had been coated with paralysis poison meant for larger prey. George demanded to know whether Suya understood what he had done and warned him that he should consider the consequences once his father heard about it. Suya calmly asked what could possibly happen. He explained that he was merely a no-rank adventurer who had never progressed beyond the 5th floor and had entered through an emergency rescue portal. He added that he had been informed that his presence on that floor would be erased and that he had already retrieved Lawaluna's application paper. Once the bodies were fed to monsters, there would be no evidence left. He argued that no one would believe that a low-rank adventurer had defeated the prince and his guards alone, and therefore he would face no retribution. Suya then asked George what he had done to Lawaluna. George replied that he had done nothing. Suya aimed an arrow at him and told him to proceed carefully. Suddenly, Lawaluna asked Suya to stop, saying that it was enough. Suya turned to her and pointed out that they had attempted unspeakable acts against her. She replied that it had only been an attempt and that nothing had happened because Suya had saved her, so there would be no problem. Suya then stated that he would demand only the bare minimum, and that minimum was for George to apologize to Lawaluna. George questioned whether Suya truly expected him to apologize while he was paralyzed. At that moment, Isola arrived and informed them that he had detected movement nearby, suggesting that other parties might be approaching. He advised Suya to retrieve his arrows and leave the area immediately. Suya told George that he could apologize later, but if he ever tried to lay a hand on Lawaluna again, he should expect another arrow. He warned that next time he would aim for something far more critical. While heading Suya noticed that Lawaluna had returned. He turned toward her and she apologized, explaining that her legs were still injured. Suya gently lifted her and told her that it was not a problem at all. He also apologized for the awkward timing earlier and then asked whether she would be willing to join his party. Lawaluna happily agreed. When they returned to the camp, Isola began the first report meeting regarding the Otherworld Dungeon exploration project and asked Suya to present his development report. Suya revealed that he had officially reached the 5th floor. However, through spatial means, they had actually reached the 10th floor, though this achievement had not been recorded in the guild's official documents. He also reported that they had gained a new party member, the elven princess. He further explained that he had obtained a mysterious power from the bow he now wielded. The ability was extraordinary, allowing him to perform a precise 180-degree shot without looking and accurately hit targets up to 50 meters away. It felt to him as though he had possessed this skill for many years. Suya added that they were now receiving support from Ghettobato and the neutral faction. At that time, their allies included the Adventurer Guild, the Sava Night Owl Merchant Association, and the Eliomia West Phoenix Merchant Association. Meanwhile, their enemies still included the Prince of Lemuria. Upon hearing the new information, Isola stated that the project's success rate had increased to 2%. Suya was surprised, remarking that the number had risen significantly. Isola replied that although the number was still pathetically low, it was nevertheless a commendable improvement and proof that Suya had grown stronger. Suya humbly responded that it was all thanks to Isola's guidance. Isola dismissed the praise and suggested that they stop the meaningless compliments. He pointed out that there was still a 98% chance of failure, and that they needed to examine the situation from a more realistic perspective. Suya felt discouraged by those words, but Isola continued, explaining that properly understanding their current situation was the first step toward success. After further discussions with Makana, it had been decided that Isola would respect Suya's opinions and wishes, though it seemed more accurate to say that they had simply given up trying to control him. Isola criticized Suya for frequently acting on impulse. He pointed out that Suya had carelessly thrown away his gun, had stored excessive supplies in food reserves, and became extremely angry whenever someone wasted food. He noted that Suya rarely listened when advised against certain actions. Even when warned that his choices would bring additional problems, Suya still went out of his way to save others and even attempted to befriend them. However, Isola also acknowledged that after losing his guns, Suya had awakened a new power, one that none of the other squads had managed to achieve. Isola continued explaining how Suya had a tendency to get himself entangled in enormous problems. He added that if Suya had asked how serious the situation truly was, that alone would have been enough for Machina to place restrictions on him. Because of that, Isabella had been unable to reveal anything further. Taking advantage of the opportunity to chip away at Suya's spirit, Isola let out a faint laugh and stated that his final question for the day was whether Suya intended to abandon the project. Suya firmly denied any such intention. He stated that there were still many things he could do and that he would only consider giving up after exhausting all possible options. Isola remarked that he had expected that answer. He added that there was a saying in his homeland that those who never fail are simply those who never attempt anything. As the wind blew fiercely around them, Isola told Suya to make sure to keep himself warm, wished him a good night, and expressed appreciation for his hard work. The next day, Medim came to Suya in his carriage and apologized for disturbing him so early in the morning. Suya replied that it was fine and wondered why Medim had come so early. Medim revealed that the king had summoned Suya and Lawaluna to the palace. Suya said that he had expected this to happen and then asked what would occur if he refused to go. Medim replied that more and more people would come every day to summon him to the palace. After hearing that, Suya agreed to go, but asked if he could bring his weapons with him. Medim responded that there would be no problem, as it was normal for adventurers to be armed. He then curiously wondered what kind of relationship Suya and Lawaluna shared. Suya was shocked by the question, and Lawaluna quickly clarified that they were not in a relationship. Medim replied that it was perfectly fine either way. The scene then shifted to the castle, where Medim finally escorted them inside. They were welcomed without difficulty. Soon, a young lady stepped forward and asked if she could speak with them for a while. Medim agreed, saying that he did not mind, but reminded her that they should not keep the king waiting. The lady turned out to be Lanciel, whom Suya had met the previous day in the dungeon. She introduced herself and first asked for permission to express her deepest apologies. Lawaluna responded that it was fine, as the matter was already in the past. Lancel stated that she was not apologizing to Lawaluna, but to Suya. Suya replied that she could apologize all she wanted, but he had no intention of forgiving her. Lancel responded that it was fine and suggested that they move on to the main issue. She explained that the one who had summoned them to the palace was the prince, who had arranged everything. The prince had apologized to his own king, who in turn had apologized to the king of Lemuria and even to the king of the elves. She then asked whether they understood what that implied. Suya wondered whether the king of the elves referred to Lawaluna's father, as he still did not fully understand the customs and political structure of that world. He questioned whether this situation could lead to conflict. Lancel replied that in the worst-case scenario, it could even result in war. She explained that many elves had never accepted their defeat at the hands of humans. If the elven king decided to let the matter slide, and if the royal family, already weakened after losing the previous war, chose not to demand severe punishment, other powerful clans might just take matters into their own hands. Lancel speculated that this could eventually trigger a civil war among the elves. She further added that if such a conflict were to occur, George would face heavy criticism. However, he could easily erase his past mistakes and crimes by achieving victory in war, as it had long been a convenient custom among humans to redeem themselves through battlefield success. She continued by saying that during wartime, adventurers would be conscripted as soldiers. She then asked Lawaluna whether she truly wished to see her homeland burned once again. Lawaluna was alarmed and immediately replied that she did not want anything like that to happen. Suya then asked Lancel whether there was any possible way to prevent the war. Lancel responded by questioning whether war might actually benefit the kingdom. She added that it could also be considered necessary for the king's declining health, as he had grown old and his condition had worsened recently. She then addressed Suya directly, stating that she had heard he was a knowledgeable person who disliked fighting. She asked whether he could stop the prince's scheme. Suya replied that even if she told him all of this, he still had no idea what he could possibly accomplish on his own. At that moment, Medem approached them and remarked that they were taking a long time, asking what they were even discussing. As they began walking, Lancel quietly begged Suya to find a way to stop everything. Suya spoke with Isola, and she said that she had already understood and had predicted that such a thing would happen the previous day. She explained that after running more than 5,000 different simulations to avoid the war, they had concluded that the war was inevitable. She then apologized, saying that she had been useless. Lawaluna then called out to Suya and told him that she had an idea. Suya was surprised and said that he had a question. Lawaluna also mentioned that she had a question for him and asked whether he had a fiancé or a lover in his hometown. Suya replied that he did not have one and that he only had a younger sister. Lawaluna said that it was a good thing. Suya became completely confused by her reaction. Soon after, they were summoned inside, where the king apologized for calling them so suddenly and explained that it had been a request from his foolish son. Suya noticed that George and Lawaluna's father were also seated there, so he quietly took his place. The king then asked Lawaluna how she had been, mentioning that working as an adventurer was not easy and that she seemed to have lost some weight. Lawaluna denied it and said that she was completely fine and that it might simply be the king's imagination. The king then asked Suya whether he had come from a distant country. Suya calmly greeted him and replied that he had come from Japan and that he was an adventurer. The king remarked that he liked the fearless expression Suya carried and said that he would love to hear more about Suya's homeland the next time they met. He then stated that he had gathered everyone involved in the matter and asked George to begin by explaining why Lancel had been injured. George responded that they could discuss it later, but the king refused, sounding displeased, and said that he had already been kind enough to grant George's request by summoning both the elf king and the elf princess. The king scolded George, reminding him that he had promised to explain why Lancel had been wounded if the king helped him with his request. They then explained that Lancel was like her mother, extremely stubborn, and that if she declared she would not let something go, she would stand by her words, even if she were trampled by a dragon. Suya felt that the situation was strange and wondered why the king would go so far for a single maid. Hearing this, the king shouted and asked whether George saw the symbol of their kingdom every day. He explained that the bull represented his victory over the evil king, while the silver fox symbolized Lancel's mother, who had died protecting him. He added that if circumstances had been different, Lancel's mother might have been like an elder sister to George. He then angrily questioned whether George felt nothing after injuring her daughter. Suya was shocked and thought that he might be executed before the war even began, and that at such a rate, his sister in his own world might also end up suffering. The king continued saying that there had better be a proper explanation, as nothing would change simply by rearranging the order of events or by trying to deceive him. George responded that it had never been his intention to deceive anyone. Meanwhile, Suya glanced at Lancel and noticed that she seemed anxious. Suddenly, Lawaluna spoke up and stated that it had been Suya who injured Lancel. Suya was utterly confused upon hearing this. Lawaluna continued, explaining that they had fought against George's party in the dungeon the previous day. Although such an act had been strictly strictly prohibited. They had been trapped in a situation where retreat had not been possible. She further revealed that everything had happened for the sake of acknowledging her betrothal to Suya. Upon hearing this shocking revelation, everyone present, including Suya himself, was left stunned. Lawaluna explained that marriage between a human and an elf was not permitted in the forest of Hyurs. However, she clarified that she was currently living as a simple adventurer. Therefore, she was bound to follow the laws of the adventurer king, and she did not wish to trouble the king with the complaints of a princess who had fallen from grace. The situation left them at a loss, but George told them that they could come to him if they wished. He added that if they possessed the power to prove themselves, he would personally mediate with the king on their behalf. In truth, George was deeply frightened after hearing everything. Lawaluna continued her explanation, saying that they had fought with all their strength. However, despite their efforts, they were overwhelmed by the bravery of the prince and Lanciel. Both her magic and Suya's archery had proved insufficient. Just when they were about to give up, the final arrow released by the two of them was blessed with the favor of Hyurs. That miraculous arrow shattered Lanciel's shield. After witnessing that miracle, the magnanimous prince admitted his defeat, which was the reason they had come there. The king then asked Lanciel whether this account was true. Lanciel confirmed that the final arrow they had released resembled the one that had once defeated the great spider, Lola. She stated that she had witnessed a legend unfold before her very eyes. The king praised George, saying that he had disregarded the risks while fulfilling the wishes of his people and had acted as a true king. He reflected that although George had once lived a life of carelessness and disgrace, children often grow significantly once their guardians stop watching over them. At that moment, George was trembling, while Saul thought that it was an impressive story, though unfortunately he knew it was nothing more than a complete fabrication. The Elf King wondered whether that was the reason he had been summoned, remarking that he had more important matters to attend to than becoming involved in such affairs. Although the king asked him to wait, the Elf King rose to leave, declaring that his daughter was already dead to him and that all he saw before him was an adventurer. He added that this was a matter for the king of Lemuria to handle. As he departed, the king formally declared that he acknowledged their engagement and would conduct the ceremony according to the customs of the elves. Lawaluna mentioned that it would be beneficial for them. The king continued by saying that he would cover part of the expenses and would have the association handle the necessary paperwork. He further added that a marriage between different races would undoubtedly come with difficulties, but in the end, it was an adventure Suya would have to undertake himself. Both of them agreed. Suya felt sorry for his sister as he prepared to get married. When they returned to the camp, Lawaluna suddenly knelt in front of Suya and apologized. She explained that she had heard from Mashina and Miss Ronica that kneeling was the proper posture to express the deepest apology. Suya was utterly shocked and wondered what they had been teaching her. Lawaluna admitted that she had been foolish to cause such events without first confirming Suya's feelings. She confessed that just when she thought she had repaid him, she had dragged him into yet another complicated matter. Although she had acted in the name of preventing a war, she acknowledged that she had overstepped her boundaries. She realized that she was nowhere near worthy of his affection and that she was more aware of this fact than anyone else. However, she said she could not take back the words she had spoken to the king. Therefore, until someone they could truly love appeared in their lives, she asked Suya to pretend to be married to her. Suya thought about the idea of a fake marriage. Just then, Isola and Machina arrived and questioned whether he felt no shame for pushing Lawaluna into speaking that way. They warned him that he had better behave properly, as they would not hesitate to abandon him if he ruined everything. In response, Suya extended his hand toward Lawaluna and suggested that they should get married, or at least pretend to. At that moment, Air came out, having overheard the conversation. She wondered where they had been earlier and remarked that they had finally returned. Lawaluna, smiling happily, told her not to be startled and announced that she was going to marry Suya. Air was completely stunned upon hearing the news. Finally, on the 12th day, Suya got married, and everyone enjoyed the celebration. By the 14th day, Suya was sitting beside Air, who was injured. She asked him whether he had enjoyed the wedding. Suya replied that he had and mentioned that Lawaluna was suffering from a hangover. Air commented that it was unfortunate she had been unable to attend her sister's wedding and said she was certain there had been plenty of delicious food. Suya responded that she would enjoy her own wedding even more someday. Air sadly reminded him that they both knew she could no longer move her legs. Suya recalled that, according to the machine's scanned data, the bullet had passed through her stomach and pierced her hip bone. The only way to cure her would be through an operation involving opening her body and removing damaged organs. Air told him not to hesitate to sell her belongings if they were in the way, or even to sell her since elves fetched a high price, even as corpses. She added that he would not even need to trouble himself with a funeral. If he simply returned a single strand of her hair to the forest, that would be enough. She also instructed him to tell her father or brother to piss off if they insulted him. Grasping Suya's hand, she asked him to take good care of her sister. She said she had no regrets left. Suyavan asked her whether she was truly certain. She appeared confused. He then reminded her that she already knew he had come to that world for the sake of his little sister. Afterward, Suya went to Makina and asked whether she understood the situation. Makina replied that she could decompile the restoration program's data and access the necessary information required for the operation. With that decision made, they began preparing Air for surgery. Isola asked Suya for confirmation that once the decompilation was complete, a full restoration would no longer be possible. She wanted to know whether he was truly certain about proceeding. Suya replied that if they were willing to go through with it, then he was as well. They had already anticipated that he would respond that way. Makina added that she would handle the preparations and stated that they were ready to begin. Suya wondered about the chances of a successful operation. He was informed that the probability stood at 100%. Isola explained that although the medical knowledge retrieved from the old world was 40 years old, it included emergency surgical procedures that would still be useful and could improve the success rate by an additional 20%. Upon hearing this, Suya agreed and urged them to save his little sister. They assured him that they would do everything in their power to live up to his expectations. Miss Ronica silently observed everything from behind. Suya was cooking while Isola stood nearby, remarking that adventuring came with constant danger and that Suya could lose his life at any time. Therefore, she advised him to leave behind proper records. Suya agreed. Makina then mentioned that she was having difficulty coming up with a suitable title and that Isola's suggestions had not been helpful at all. Suya, being familiar with copyrights and the importance of an appealing concept, said that they needed something that would capture people's attention and make them curious to know more. Machina therefore asked him to come up with an appropriate title. Suya took a moment to think. At that time, Lawaluna and Air asked him about the food. As Suya looked at Air standing there as if nothing had ever happened, he recalled that her wounds had completely healed. He would not call it a miracle, but everything had been made possible thanks to the help of Makina and Isola, although they had been uncertain about how modern anesthetics and medicines from their world would affect her body. The days had passed peacefully as they carefully monitored her condition. According to Air, they had been worrying too much. Now it was the day they were preparing to enter the dungeon again. Lawaluna and Air both had healthy appetites, which made cooking an enjoyable task for Suya. He even thought that he might prepare katsudon if they managed to catch a boar inside the dungeon. Machina once again called out to Suya, asking about the title and requesting something cool. She promised that they would accept his decision without criticizing it. Suya agreed and said that he did not want to overthink it. He decided to keep it simple and stated that the title would be A Foreigner's Dive into the Dungeon.